Harper Audio presents There Is No Good Card for This. What to Say and Do When Life is Scary, Awful, and Unfair to People You Love. By Kelsey Crowe, Ph.D., and Emily McDowell. Read by Exie Sands. There is nothing I would not do for those who are really my friends. I have no notion of loving people by halves. It is not my nature. Jane Austen, Northanger Abbey. Wow. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Most of us, most of the time. Introduction. Life spoiler alert. Bad things happen. To begin, we present to you a true story about trying to console a friend in a tough situation, which shows how our best intentions can go off the rails fast. Monique and Amy were out for a run one morning. As the two friends ran slowly up a hill, Monique chatted idly about herself. What should I do this weekend? Maybe a movie. Though, I need a haircut. Something short? Should I get bangs again? Then Amy slowed to a stop. Monique, Amy said, I was diagnosed with breast cancer yesterday. Monique's mouth went dry. What do I say? How can I help? Quick, think of something. Oh, no, not that. Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God. I'm so sorry, she said. That must be so horrible for you. Monique hugged her and quickly pulled away. Monique asked for more details, and as they talked, the initial shock wore off a bit. And then Monique said, Hey, have you ever seen Terms of Endearment? The two friends were at the bottom of the hill now. They stopped again, and Amy, as if catching her breath, stared at her incredulously. The movie? Yeah, Monique said, with Deborah Winger. Right, and she's a young mother who dies of breast cancer? Oh. Monique's mind tumbled and turned. She was talking about that movie, but she'd meant to reference another part, a funny part. Humor was always Monique's first resort for everything, including being scared. But Monique had forgotten a kind of important detail. Deborah Winger died at the end of the movie. Never mind, Monique said. Just kidding. Wait, I just told you that I have cancer, and now you want me to watch the saddest movie of all time about someone who dies of cancer. I'm a dumbass, Monique said. Yes, Amy said. Yes, you are. We've all been there, haven't we? The phone rings and someone you love is sobbing. Your gut tightens, your pulse quickens. A coworker's child has been born with a serious heart condition, or someone's husband has been in a car accident, or a friend has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Whatever it is, a person's life has just fallen apart and you feel awful, and you also have no freaking clue what to say, let alone do. Well, there's a reason you don't know what to say. In some situations, there are absolutely no words that will make things better. There's nobody on earth who can make everything okay for a mother who has lost her child, or for a man whose wife was diagnosed with cancer. That's one reason many of us say nothing at all. The bad news is that you're right. You probably aren't going to fix anyone's pain with your words. But the good news is that no human being can, so there's nothing wrong with you if you can't come up with the perfect thing to say. I genuinely think that anything anyone said to me, whenever they said it, was okay. Some things helped more than others, but anyone who had the courage to reach out and speak to me made me feel better. Anne, who lost her mother. And doing something to help? Well, that's even better. Figuring out what to do may sound harder than knowing what to say, but by the end of this book, you will know how to do both, and it won't be hard. You'll simply learn all the ways in which you're already good at being a friend, and we'll help you with the rest. Whiskey for the Wounded. This book is not chicken soup for the soul, it's whiskey for the wounded. So don't expect a self-help, miracle-making volume on how to transform you into the world's most empathetic person. We will also assume that because you graduated from kindergarten, you already know that empathy and compassion are important, and that being a helpful friend is a good way to be. Another assumption we'll take the liberty of stating right now: you are not perfect, and we don't expect you to become perfect at this, because there's no such thing anyway. We are not trying to make you a textbook gold star helper, creating yet another impossible goal. The first time something unimaginably terrible happens to a friend, and it will happen at some point, you may get a pass for awkward behavior. Yet, as time goes on, if you want to be a responsible grown-up, you've got to do a little better than that. When someone in your life is hurting, there are real, concrete ways to help, and that's what we're here for. We know, however, that there are definitely times to not reach out, to not say anything. We can't all show up at every bad turn in someone's life. And equally true, not everyone wants you to be involved in their particular difficult situation. It's not our intention to turn you into an overbearing do-gooder. Our goal is to help you get a basic foundation in giving comfort, assess the difference between being supportive and being a Budinsky, and ultimately to help you move past just thinking about a suffering person to actually doing something, even a small thing, if the situation calls for it, and doing it with confidence instead of fear of what could go wrong. There are a few different ways to use this book. No doubt many of you have a friend in crisis right now, and if that's the case, you're probably looking for some handy, practical things to say and do that will help today. You'll find those in parts 2 and 3. In fact, if you only have 4 minutes in which to figure out what to say to your grieving colleague, part 3 has got you covered. For those who are ready, however, part 1 gets at the hows and whys of our struggle to connect in times of suffering. It offers ways to reflect on and put down our own psychological baggage and fears, which are often what get in the way of reaching out at all. Taking the time to work on your mindset, as well as the skills we offer in this book, will make your life easier, not harder. That might seem counterintuitive, since reaching out means adding one more to-do item in your already busy schedule. But you'll find that making the effort to connect is worth the peace of mind it brings, not to mention a better night's sleep, because you aren't lying awake at night feeling like a terrible person for not emailing so-and-so. In addition to the feeling of well-being that comes with aligning your actions with your intentions, this empathy practice will result in more meaningful connections, not just in terms of what you give, but in terms of what you receive. Your circle of care will widen, from your best friend to a colleague to a neighbor to a casual acquaintance to even a stranger. It sounds paradoxical, but it's true. Being there in moments of suffering can actually lead to more joy. Why listen to us? We are people. Like many of you, we've had our ups and downs in life, and as a result, we both ended up fascinated by this topic, but in completely different ways. It's safe to say that our early 20s pretty much sucked, though for different reasons. Kelsey's story. I had lost my mother to mental illness when I was 21 years old. She was my only parent. I had no siblings, aunts, or uncles, and my grandparents had long since passed away. Despite her illness, my mother and I were always incredibly close, and then she decided to stop taking psychotropic medication. The result was paranoia and delusions that became all-consuming. After I had tried getting her into a hospital for help, she never spoke to me again, and a few years later, she died. When my mother rejected me, my tiny but entire family was gone. It was a loss that comes with no ritual for mourning, where, save my closest friends, the death of the dearest person in my life was basically unmentioned. Emily's story. When I was 24 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma. After 9 months of chemo and radiation, I went into remission and have been cancer-free for 15 years, knock on wood. The most difficult part of my illness wasn't losing my hair or being erroneously called sir by Starbucks baristas, or sickness from chemo. It was the loneliness and isolation I felt when many of my close friends and family members disappeared because they didn't know what to say or said the absolute wrong thing without realizing it. And for both of us, with age came more challenging stuff, as is normal for us humans. Cancer showed up again. Emily lost her college roommate and her father-in-law to it, and Kelsey was treated for breast cancer twice. Our experiences alone didn't make us empathy experts. They just made us understand how important it is in difficult times to have support from the people in our lives. But without clear instructions about what to do or say, it can be easy to doubt your own capacity to provide support. And with an absence of social ritual or models about how to support someone in a really difficult time, we may not recognize that doing or saying something, anything, could be a really big deal for someone who is scared or grieving. With all that in mind, we have both worked in our individual ways to make it a little easier for people to show up when life is hard. Emily used her platform as a greeting card writer and illustrator, her experience as a cancer survivor, and the lessons she learned around the loss of her close college friend to launch her line of empathy cards, specifically designed to give us more authentic ways of connecting around illness and grief. Kelsey founded an organization called Help Each Other Out, which provides empathy boot camps, workshops on being there for people we care about, developed with input from empathy experts and advisors from the fields of business, medicine, and grief counseling. To inform these workshops and to write this book, she also did extensive online survey research with over 900 people and interviewed 50 other people who had been through all kinds of difficult times, all to learn what support worked and what didn't. What Kelsey learned from her research and from empathy boot camps offered in university, hospital, and business settings, and what Emily found in the incredible response to her empathy cards, is this. Whether you're a professional social worker or a freaked-out best friend, if you're struggling with how to support someone who is hurting, you are not alone. This is something virtually everyone wrestles with at some point. Both of us definitely have. All our research and engagement around grief has enhanced and considerably changed our own previously held beliefs about what is and isn't supportive. We want to spare you from making the same mistakes we've made and offer you what we've learned in a straightforward, we've all been that dumbass kind of way. Our approach. Our approach boils down to one word: trust. When it comes to supporting the people you care about, trusting yourself, your ability to be kind and care, your values, and what you can authentically do is the key to navigating life's worst neighborhoods. To help you learn to trust yourself in this arena, we dive into 3 credos in this book that we call the 3 touchstones of showing up. 1, your kindness is your credential. 2, listening speaks volumes. And 3, small gestures make a big difference. By exploring the meaning as well as the practical application of these touchstones in your life, you will feel more confident to give. If you think an awkward response to a friend's crisis will make them feel bad, then you should know that if you say nothing, they will likely feel worse. But don't worry, you're not on your own. This book will empower you with the confidence to reach out to others, friends, family, acquaintances, and even strangers, in their difficult times, fostering everlasting, or momentary, deep connections. We will help move you past the analysis paralysis of just thinking about a person who's having a hard time, to actually doing something for that person, and doing it with good judgment. If you take one thing away from this book, it should be this. If you're choosing between saying something and saying nothing, you're almost always better off saying something. And when someone in your life is hurting, there are real, concrete ways to help. Chances are you've probably got a friend in need at this very moment. Part 1. Laying some groundwork. Chapter 1. Put your own oxygen mask on first. I think people don't ask or say anything because it's an uncomfortable topic. In the meantime, I'm going through a huge life transition, and it's like the elephant in the room that is not being addressed. I think that's the main thing, that most people just don't ask or don't say anything. Carla, divorced. It goes like this. A work colleague loses his spouse, and you, who have never experienced a loss like this, don't know what to do to help. Hell, you never even knew he had a spouse. For his part, well, he's always been super supportive when you faced a tough deadline, and he's always just the right amount of office-friendly. You shared pictures of your cats doing weird things. You definitely care about each other, but you aren't close friends. So you do what many of us do in this kind of situation. You totally avoid the bereaved man's gaze at every turn. But it's not as if you're an uncaring person, so you wait patiently for the exact right words to come to you, and they will come, you tell yourself. Weeks go by, and they never do. And now you're skipping your coffee breaks to avoid running into your colleague at the vending machine, and every time you see him, you feel like a terrible person, and you also really miss coffee. It happens to all of us. A flash of goodwill when something bad happens to people fades into a deep-seated regret and even shame. But it's probably better this way, right? You don't want to upset him. Best to play it safe. But deep down, safe feels like a cop-out. If you're somebody who'd rather take the long way back to your desk to spare yourself an awkward encounter with the bereaved, take heart, because we have all been there. How do we move from uncomfortable avoidance to actually saying or doing something helpful? We start by first trusting that we are capable of reaching out. And that means looking at what makes us so insecure about reaching out in the first place. We have a few ideas, which we're serving up as short exercises below. These exercises take just a little time and preparation to do, and they address some common hang-ups about reaching out that we develop over our lifetimes. Get out some stickies, a writing pad, or journal, and feel free to see if a friend or two are game to do this with you. Or just read along as if, giving yourself time to pause and reflect on the questions. Empathy warm-up. What's your roadblock? Think about an instance when you shied away from someone in a difficult time, a good friend, colleague, neighbor, family member, anyone. We're not talking about someone who pushed your boundaries and drained all your empathy fuel. We're talking about the person you wanted to reach out to but didn't. And importantly, not because they thought you should, but because you thought you should. Now, think about your reasons for not reaching out. If you're alone, feel free to write them down on a piece of paper. If you're with a friend, write them down, and then use a few minutes to each share your stories of shying away. You may be surprised to discover just how long this conversation can be. When reflecting on your reasons for shying away and feeling like you let yourself and/or your loved ones down, here is something to remember. We all carry regrets. In her empathy boot camps, Kelsey has collected hundreds of people's regrets about shying away. Here are just a few. I wish I'd called my friend in the past year since her father died. I feel I haven't been there enough for my niece and nephews whose mom died, even though I work in the death and dying field. I regret shying away from a church friend who was dying of cancer. I was scared. I'm sorry, Sue. I wasn't there for you in London. I was afraid. I'm with you now. I wish I'd visited my uncle in the hospital. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't understand your pain. I was so little. I wish I'd reached out to my friend after her miscarriage. I didn't know what to say. 3 empathy roadblocks. What makes us shy away? Meet the empathy roadblocks. Fear of doing the wrong thing. Oh, God, what if I make it worse? We feel pressure to cure the situation with the perfect gesture, and if we fail, we fear we'll ruin a relationship or just embarrass ourselves. Fear of saying the wrong thing. We don't know if we are supposed to know certain things. We don't want to make someone feel like the source of gossip. We don't want to bring up negative feelings if someone wasn't thinking about that awful thing that happened. If we're not really close to the person, for example, a coworker, we might feel like it's not our place to help, and that when we do, we'll say something that makes them feel worse. Fear of not having time and/or bandwidth. We're busy, life is crazy, and we don't want to commit to more than we can handle. We're not sure how much of a commitment this stuff involves. Good news. We're making it harder than it needs to be. One day, while in the car on the way to preschool, Kelsey's young daughter, Georgia, piped up from the back seat. Mom, what do you actually do for a living? Kelsey paused, trying to come up with an answer. Well, Kelsey said, I help friends be there for each other when they are sad. Oh, said Georgia, that's easy. Oh, really? Said Kelsey. What would you say to help someone in need? Then Georgia rattled off this list. I'm sorry, do you want to play with me? Do you want to take a little break? Do you want a little hug? Take a minute to listen to that short list again, and consider that Georgia just blew up the notion that helping isn't an ability we're born with or a skill we naturally pick up between learning to tie our shoes and figuring out a glue stick. Sadly, something happens as we grow up. We change from being completely unself-conscious and intuitive about how to comfort someone to being self-doubting, freaked-out messes. How did we get here? We believe it comes down to what Aaron T. Beck, widely considered the founder of cognitive psychology, describes as our 2 main fears. 1, I am unlovable, and 2, I am incompetent. That about covers it, doesn't it? We've all felt the emotional sting when our overtures of friendship are rejected, our intentions are misunderstood, or our attempts at being kind are disregarded. These little hurts start on the playground and build up over a lifetime. We've all had the feeling of being unable to connect, and buried deep below that, considered the universal questions that gnaw at us. Am I just incapable of connection? Can I even do this? Is there something wrong with me? And as we all know, doubts like these remind us of our limitations. So often, we try and play it safe by avoiding this situation altogether. When someone is in a difficult time that we don't understand, the stakes can feel pretty high, and it's really, really tempting to avoid the risk of failure entirely, especially when we are not sure if trying will help. But here's the thing. You can pretend to be somebody who doesn't make mistakes, but A, that's impossible, and B, it's not actually all that supportive. Because when we're feeling vulnerable and scared, who do we immediately want to turn to? It probably isn't the person we know whose life appears to be perfect. We go to the person we trust, and this has very little to do with perfection. Often it's the opposite. If we really want to have authentic connections with others, then we need to talk about 2 kinds of psychological baggage we tend to carry around. which make us completely self-conscious about our capacity to connect with people. 1, guilt about how we've let others down, and 2, resentment about being let down by others in the past. The resulting beliefs that we are not enough and that others are not enough get in the way of trusting our innate capacities to give. Empathy warm-up. You're good enough, you're smart enough, you know the rest. You've been let down. We all have. But you've let someone down too, and because we're not monsters, we feel guilty about that. Guilt can be useful when it reminds us to do better and when it lifts us up to be more responsible, mature people. But when guilt's endgame is simply more guilt with a side of guilt, without ever changing us for the better, then it only drags us down. One way to free ourselves of guilt is simply to accept who we are. There's a good reason the internet is plastered with quotes about this. Kelsey can feel guilty every time she gets a scone with her morning coffee, or she can accept that she needs a deliciously carby reward for making it out of bed and grooming herself most mornings, and that with middle age fast approaching, her college body is a thing of the past. It feels really grown up in a good way when we accept things about ourselves, like not wearing heels, not liking whiskey, or not wanting to tell the cab driver our life story on the way to the airport. Then we can relax into who we really are and stop using up energy on things that don't matter. I will never drink enough water. I wear the same pants a lot. I don't care about wine. I totally don't get sushi. I think dogs are annoying. I love shows about makeovers. I need 9 hours of sleep. Yoga bores me. I eat frozen pizza by choice. I accept myself. Some of the ways we manage guilt, however, are not so helpful, particularly avoiding guilt by resigning ourselves to being less than we are, meaning less capable, less loving, less present. It's a self-defeating rather than self-actualized choice. For example, it's one thing for Kelsey to accept that a scone is a small price to pay for a good mood in the morning. It's quite another to tell ourselves that people are better off without our help because we're just no good at giving it. Not only is that not true, it's a lot easier to learn to be kind than it is to give up carbs, but it's also dangerous. Believing that you're incapable of connecting during painful times can isolate you from life's most connected moments. In this book, we'll give you a lot of really helpful tips on showing up that even the most feelings-averse among us can master. But to believe that these skills will work, you will first need to believe in the benefit of you, the flawed you, trying. And that begins with being a lot less hard on yourself. So we're going to ask that you get some of that guilt off your chest. Empathy workout. Being kind to others begins with being kind to ourselves. Take some sticky notes or index cards or cut some paper to create your own cards and write down 1 to 3 times when you shied away from someone suffering. Consider the following truths. Yes, they are true. Because I shied away, it does not make me an awful person. Because I shied away, it does not mean I am bad at empathy. Write out your regret on the cards. I regret... Consider this as you fill the cards out. I did the best I could with the tools I had at the time, because that's probably true too. You also have permission to admit some of the deeper things that got in the way of reaching out, like the following. I was self-involved and didn't see their suffering. I didn't think my effort would matter that much. I was afraid of getting sucked in. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to give enough. And then, write out on your cards, I forgive myself for a time I shied away because... Now, take your cards and create a little ceremony of letting them go. You could burn them on the beach, in your yard, or in your fireplace, or a sink or trash can will do just fine if you don't have access to a beach, yard, or fireplace. Or plant them in the soil with a seed or young sapling, or fold them into paper airplanes and send them off the roof of your building. You get the idea. We found that actually destroying the paper makes a psychic difference instead of just throwing it in the garbage or leaving it in a journal. It sounds a little woo-woo, but having your own personal ritual of letting go can literally and symbolically feel like the psychological baggage of guilt is burned away. Next up, scary conversation, tip number 1. You can apologize to the person you shied away from too, if you want to. You can do it with an email or a card, or you can talk. And you know what? It may be that the behavior you've been agonizing over for years is not even remembered by the person you're reaching out to. Or it's possible that reaching out may bring up some anger you will have to accept. Or it may result in sincere appreciation for your intention to make things right. Emily says, when I got sick, I was 24. If you've ever known a 24-year-old or been one, you understand that in general this is not exactly an age rife with sage wisdom and life experience. None of my close friends had ever known anyone with cancer beyond a grandparent, let alone someone their age. Everyone was really scared, and we all fumbled very awkwardly through it. Some people shied away because they didn't know how to handle it, and at the time I interpreted it as them not caring about me. Over the years, various friends have reached out to apologize for things they did or didn't do that time. In a couple of cases, this was over 10 years later. A lot of the time, I didn't even recall the particular thing they'd been lying awake at night over. These conversations have clearly been way more stressful for the other person than for me, and even though I let go of any resentment long ago, if there ever was any to begin with, it's been really touching and meaningful to me every time someone reached out. Letting resentments go. We're human. Most of us carry grudges. They can be useful, too. Grudges are helpful in shielding us from the people in our lives who've treated us badly or taken advantage of our vulnerability. But as much as that coping strategy might work to protect us in the short term, too many grudges are like excess scar tissue, blocking our ability to make rewarding emotional connections. That's when our smart strategies at self-preservation turn into harmful forms of self-sabotage. If we want to develop relationships that weather life's imperfect times, we have to be capable of weathering people's imperfections too. One way to let go of these resentments that no longer serve us is to first consider what was given to us that we may have failed to notice at the time. In order to receive, we must notice what is given. In the depths of our suffering, valuing what we receive can be a lot harder than it sounds. Sometimes the vastness and intensity of emotions of despair or fear can crowd everything else out and keep us from seeing the beautiful things being offered to us. The irony, of course, is that this is the time when we need these beautiful things the most. Kelsey says, "My own family experience taught me the value of being able to receive care however I found it. But this lesson didn't come easy. My younger life narrative, the one in which I believed no adult had stepped up when I lost my mother to mental illness, experienced a much-needed shift when I happened upon some contradictory evidence. The evidence was in the form of a letter, which came while I was volunteering with the Peace Corps in Africa. I'd written to my mother's only friend about being scared to return to the United States with no place to go home to. In her response, my mother's friend didn't offer me a place to stay, and that hurt. 15 years later, I read the letter again and found something important that I had failed to see earlier, which represented a completely different story from the one I told myself. My mother's friend had actually written, "Sometimes we all need a mom. I want to be your mom when you need one." Somehow, in the depths of my longing, I missed what I had probably most needed to hear. And it's probably true that I was disappointed with many of the people in my life, which, upon reflection, was a lot about failing to notice what I was being given. We know this is difficult advice to follow, but when you think about your experience of pain and how others were or were not there for you, it's useful to pay close attention and to learn to recognize who is there for you now. Notice each gesture from a friend, family member, stranger, colleague, or neighbor that comes your way to give you comfort. A hug, a listening ear, a car ride, an offer to see a movie. Cherish it. No need to write a thank you note or express anything outwardly, and just the act of noticing the gesture will reflect your gratitude and make you an easier person to whom to give. This act of noticing and gratitude is not about becoming someone who sees the bright side of everything, because that person is really effing annoying. Instead, it's about opening ourselves up to notice the generosity that is actually there. And often that comes in forms we never expected. If we view people's efforts of kindness as not enough, then we will likely continue to be disappointed. That's because if people are afraid of failing us, they will more likely shy away, not because they are bad people or evil people. Like all of us, they're just scared humans who hate the feeling of failure. There are people who let us down over and over again, and learning to expect less of them is a great practice in self-care. But the kind of people we want to be attracting in our lives are sincere and well-meaning. With them in mind, we advise that the more likely we are to notice what we do receive, the less likely we are to notice what we failed to get. This is a useful outlook that helps us not only experience more bounty, but also give with more joy, too. Because when we feel others have failed us with their deficient efforts, we'll often judge our own efforts to comfort by the same impossible standards. Such high standards of ourselves can make us feel inadequate, prompting us to shy away and do nothing for fear our effort will fall short. Or they can cause us to give too much or with excessive worry, which are tendencies that make our gifts harder to receive. We explain what both of these possibilities look like in Chapter 3. The more we can appreciate the small gifts that we receive, the more we can appreciate the small gifts that we offer. Empathy workout. There's medicine in forgiveness. Think about someone who let you down in either a big or small way, but in a way that really matters to you. It could be a close friend, a family member, a neighbor, anybody. Don't think about somebody who always lets you down. That person should just be an ex-friend. Write down a small fictional note to that person with this prompt. I felt let down when you... But before you write the note, ask yourself these questions. The answers could be yes to any or all of these, and you still are allowed to feel disappointed. The answer could be no to all of these, and you still are allowed to feel disappointed. Did I fully admit to my needs at this time? Was I able to fully appreciate the person's authentic gift that didn't look like what I thought should be offered? Did I ask for more than this person could handle at this one time or over a series of times? Is the person a different person now? And then, if you feel prepared, you can consider forgiving this person. The point of forgiveness is not for the other person's benefit. It's purely for yours. Because once you recognize your grudge or anger and see its source, this will help bring compassion and empathy to the situation and help you discard the resentment that can get in the way of helping others who need you. I forgive the person for shying away from me because... Empathy tip. Forgiveness doesn't mean burying our feelings and crossing our fingers that they'll just go away. In order to successfully forgive, we need to take a look at the source of our anger or hurt, with the help of listening friends and occasionally a professional. Often, such feelings are rooted in our own sense of unworthiness. Forgiveness comes when we're able to recognize that the other person's actions were more about them, their own motivations and context, than about us, and that insight may or may not justify their behavior. It's not so much that we forgive to forget, but that we forgive in order to learn about others, learn about ourselves, and let go of resentments that hold us down. Next up, scary conversation tip number 2. Once you've done the previous exercise of letting go of resentment, consider how you might talk to the person about how you felt let down. Yikes, scary. This is a very vulnerable conversation to have, so we'd suggest doing 2 things. 1, start by telling your friend you feel really vulnerable even raising this issue. 2, then tell your friend that you want to build a stronger connection with them by first recognizing a basic fact about humanity. This shit is hard for any of us. Bottom line, we all mess up, because we're all human. When looking back at all the cringe-inducing things you might have said or done to someone in their darkest hour, it's easy to feel like you don't have the right kind of fancy emotional training to provide support. And when thinking back on the times when we have been let down by others, we may feel ashamed of how needy we were, that we didn't deserve support, or maybe that we weren't lovable enough to be supported. Just because most of us aren't confident about knowing what to do, or because we have some baggage about being let down or letting others down, that doesn't mean we're all fatally flawed in the empathy department. It just means we're human. And humans get scared, awkward, and uncomfortable. Now that we've unpacked some of our own fears and issues around showing up, let's take a look from the other side, the perspective of the person in crisis. Chapter 2. Standing in their shoes. Friends and family turned away when we needed them most. Mary, whose toddler was diagnosed with leukemia. The 5 stages of grief. Crying in public, crying in the car, crying alone while watching TV, crying at work, crying when you're a little drunk. I love you. Alexandra looked at the 5 stages of grief poster in her therapist's office and wanted to scream, laugh, and cry at the same time. 5 stages? She thought. How about 500? Her sister had died in a car accident 6 months earlier. Alexandra had gone back to work a week later since she couldn't afford not to, and that's just what people do. There had been a recognized mourning period where it felt permissible for her to be sad, but that had long since passed, and everyone around her seemed to just be back to normal. Back to spreadsheets and pointless meetings about sales targets and stupid things like fighting with strangers over parking spaces. But Alexandra wasn't back to normal. There was no normal to go back to. There was just this new reality in which everything she did felt inappropriate. She was fine one minute, then crying uncontrollably as a sudden wave of grief hit her, bonus points if it happened in a really public place like the fruit section of the grocery store. She didn't know how to relate to anyone, and she didn't know how to talk about it. When friends called, she could hardly stand to hear her own bullshit. I'm okay, I'm fine. Worse, though, was hearing the truth. She felt hopeless and alone. At a certain point, it was easier to just not answer the phone. What does grief look like? For starters, grief usually comes with some kind of tangible primary loss. It can be loss of mobility, energy, or appearance if dealing with health. It can be loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of a marriage. Even in depression, there is loss of the ability to feel just about anything. Caregivers of people who are ill lose companionship they counted on. People who experience miscarriage and infertility experience the loss of a dream of the future. These are the key primary losses a person may experience during grief. Loss of identity. We often underestimate how much we rely on easy narratives about who we are in the world until we're blindsided by a primary loss that strips us bare of them. Now that I'm not married, who am I? Being a professor was my identity. Where do I go from here? My son died, but I still feel like a mom. Loss of companionship. Our most difficult times, at their core, are about a significant loss of companionship. Losing someone really close to us to death or significant illness or divorce can radically shift the makeup of our interior, intimate lives and our days. When the person we talk to the most, confide in, get opinions from, and love the deepest is gone, the hole that is left behind is vast and aching beyond measure. Loss of community. Loss and transition affect not only our most intimate relationships, they change our community as well. And that change usually feels really lonely. We may lose the friends and family of our loved one that is gone. We may lose people we thought we were close to because they don't know what to do or say. We can also isolate ourselves because we fear what our community might do or say, or because we don't have the emotional or physical energy to engage. Loss of confidence. People who've been fired, who are dealing with a new illness, who are getting divorced, you name it. Loss can create some of the most demanding responsibilities in our lives about our well-being, medical and legal options, our finances, where we'll live, or how we'll raise our children, exactly at a time when we have the fewest emotional reserves to learn and cope. Loss of economic security. Loss can create economic stress, like increased healthcare costs, the cost of divorce attorneys, loss of income, childcare costs, and a host of other expenses. One woman struggling to carry the cost of infertility treatments put it this way: "It's hard to accept a dinner invitation when what it will cost would pay for my blood draw." Accompanying these primary losses are secondary losses that are more subtle and often more difficult emotionally to deal with. However, and this is great news for our purposes, the emotional effects of these secondary losses can, with the support of friends, feel less hurtful over time. Here are a list of secondary losses, which are emotions we experience when life gets hard. Hopeless. The thing about grief is that it can seem like it will never, ever end. And in a number of ways, it doesn't. As anyone in the grief world knows, you don't get over loss. You learn to live with it. But until that happens, the light at the end of the tunnel is not a thing, or if it is, it's just barely visible on the best days. Scared. Fear often accompanies loss, illness, divorce, or any kind of transition because you have no idea what's ahead of you. You end up worrying about the worst that could happen, and, thanks to the magic of the internet, worrying is easier than ever before. Vulnerable. If your illness or treatment has caused you to look different, your appearance elicits concern and questions and strange looks, turning your rituals of everyday life, like grocery shopping, into a public spectacle. Even if you don't look different on the outside, news of a change like divorce or a job loss or fertility struggles invites speculation that can make your life feel like fodder for gossip. Ashamed. Grief, fear, and our deepest feelings of failure can make us blame ourselves for causing what happened, or at least failing to cope with it. Shame makes us feel unentitled to our own grief and fears. It looks like this. It's been a year since my wife died. I should be ready to move on. I'm so sorry I'm such a mess. I'll pull myself together. I waited until I was 38 to try to have kids. What did I expect? What does experiencing loss, hopelessness, fear, vulnerability, and shame mean about receiving help? Asking makes me feel like a burden. When in the thick of our rough times, we can feel utterly undeserving of love and attention and think we're just taking and taking, being a burden. Even if we're comfortable asking for help in normal circumstances, many of us would rather suffer in silence than reach out for help at our worst. You're not a burden. You're a human. I don't even know what the F I need. People who are suffering may not even know what they need until it sneaks up on them, and they realize they've been surviving for 3 days on Diet Coke and Twizzlers. Often, when we're suffering, outsiders see our work project suffering, circles under our eyes getting darker, and dishes piling up in the sink more quickly than we do. I'm overwhelmed. Crying for days on end, feeling numb, not sleeping for weeks, pretending to not be grieving so other people feel more comfortable around you. It's all exhausting. Keeping a lid on the chaos we call life is hard enough as it is, but then when we're at our lowest and possibly consumed with a host of additional responsibilities related to our difficult time, life becomes one big tornado of unmanaged to-dos like laundry, shopping, cleaning, kids, and so on. Projects at work and at home don't stop just because your world did. Figuring out what needs to be done, and then who can do it, which means assigning and coordinating jobs, managing people's feelings around jobs they're given, and dealing with the occasional lack of follow-through, is enough to make anyone want to crawl into a hole and do nothing. The upshot: if a person is sobbing over a pile of dishes and a pile of bills and what feels like a pile of rubble that was formerly their life, it can feel painful and even pointless to ask for help. This means that as a caring bystander, you have the opportunity and the responsibility to show up and offer help without being asked. Yes, this can feel really awkward and uncomfortable when you're not used to it, but if you're worried that you've screwed up in trying to offer support, said the wrong thing, or felt like the biggest idiot, remember that you're not feeling half as terrible as the person at the center of it. Reaching out and fumbling is often far better than not reaching out at all. Part 2. The 3 touchstones of showing up. Chapter 3. Your kindness is your credential. Having a serious illness can feel very isolating. The worst thing someone can do is to do and say nothing for fear of doing or saying the wrong thing. That just deepens those feelings of isolation. Terry, who had stage 3 colon cancer. Well, this is what this feels like, thought Maddie as she cleared her desk of paper clips and dumped the box of glitter pens into her computer bag. With all the years of service she had given, she figured she deserved some freaking pens. I've seen this happen enough times. I should have known it would happen to me eventually. She spent a couple of hours writing down important contacts and looking at examples of work she was proud of before slipping them into her bag, but she couldn't escape without first enduring the dreaded walk of shame. Keep your head up like it was any other day, she told herself. She walked through the corridor of glass offices on the 11th floor, each one filled with colleagues who, under normal circumstances, would probably look up and nod, smile, give her some kind of hand signal about getting drinks later. But instead, there was Mike, her lunch pal, looking determinedly through his file drawer. There was Juanita, tying her shoelace. There was Belle, fascinated by the riveting scene outside her window. As she walked out, Maddie wished that she'd understood what getting canned felt like sooner, because she was pretty sure she had been one of those avoiders. And she wished she had known that it wouldn't have taken much to offer a small gesture, a token of kindness, anything, instead of this whole lot of nothing. Billionaire businessman and former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, was asked about being fired from Salomon Brothers. He said he still remembers every person who reached out to him when he was let go. On the other hand, he said, he can't remember any of the people who called when he was promoted. That experience taught him to take an admired colleague who'd been fired out to lunch in the most visible part of a restaurant. Maybe because our lives can get more and more mundane the older we get, we find that what sustains us over the long haul, past all the breakups and professional screw-ups and weight gain and hair loss, is not the glittery connections we make when feeling on top of the world, but those we forge when we're at our lowest. At its most basic, being supportive is all about having concern for our fellow human beings, a concern that leads to some kind of comforting action. With that, meet our first touchstone of showing up. Your kindness is your credential. Why kindness matters. The value of simple kindness can be hard to accept when you're trying to learn the perfect way to comfort someone, especially when you're anxious about what not to do or say. This is why Dr. Charles Garfield, founder of the Shanti Project, which trains volunteers to care for the sick, opens up his training with the following. Everyone wants skills, how to say this, how to do that. But when people are dying, no amount of skills will earn you trust like the kindness that brings you to them in the first place. If you take nothing else from this training, take this. Your kindness is your credential. How do people who care get past that stigma and actually show up? At its core, kindness is a total absence of ego and self-interest in doing something for someone else. The defining feature of kindness is that it comes unsolicited, and in its most awe-inspiring moments, it comes to the aid of those who are shunned. People who experience loss through suicide also experience stigmatized loss, and many of them have participated in Kelsey's research. Their examples of support show that when it comes to reaching out, smooth talk isn't a requirement. As one woman described, it wasn't easy for people to speak to me about my mother's suicide. It certainly wasn't easy for my cousin, who was clearly reading her condolences off a script she wrote. In fact, her demonstration of effort mattered more to me than whatever it is she said. Every gesture was like rain falling on drought-stricken land, because I was just deprived of the wealth of condolences that people usually receive when someone dies. All our difficult times involve some degree of shame, fear, and loneliness. At times like that, we don't need anyone to impress us or skillfully talk us out of our pain. We mostly just need the kindness that compels anyone to try. Why kindness? Kindness comes from a basic social emotion, compassion. But what is compassion exactly? There are a ton of competing definitions and theories about compassion, and empathy, and altruism, and sympathy, and yes, kindness. A definition of compassion that we like comes from researchers at the University of Michigan's Compassion Lab. Compassion is to notice, feel, and respond. First, we have to notice, and as simple as that sounds, we miss opportunities to show compassion all the time because we can easily fail to notice someone's pain or fear. Seeing or anticipating someone's difficulty is a clear first step in providing them comfort. We also have to feel for that person. This is what emotions expert Dr. Paul Ekman calls emotional resonance, and it is not to be confused with identical resonance, where someone feels the exact thing as someone else. That person's support would be highly unhelpful. If you see someone's hand on fire, for example, and feel your hand burn just as intensely, then your capacity to fetch some ice and treat your friend is greatly diminished because you're focusing on your own flaming hand. Instead, emotional resonance is when you feel enough to be concerned, but not enough to require getting your own support too. And finally, when you notice and feel for someone's pain, you respond with a supportive emotion or gesture. Political scientist Kristen Monroe, who explores the development of moral courage in her work, gives us valuable steps to understanding the act of compassion. To summarize, Monroe suggests a compassionate response is something we do, not just think about. Its benefit is solely for the other person, and the act might even diminish our welfare without any expectation of recognition on our part. That's a pretty heroic list, which is why Monroe defines this set of qualities as heroic compassion. To be clear, such diminishment is not about forking over our savings, our home, or quitting our jobs to help anyone in need at any personal cost. It is, however, about inconveniencing yourself for someone else. We've all fallen short of being heroic in our compassion. Emily may feel for her neighbor's exhaustion after having a second baby, but she hasn't actually done anything that has positive consequences for her. Why? Because Emily is overwhelmed with work right now and hasn't made helping her neighbor a priority. Please don't judge her. Sometimes we just can't do the right thing. Sometimes it's because we don't care enough about the welfare of a particular person to inconvenience ourselves, and sometimes it's just because life gets in the way. The way we see it, number one, we don't have the capacity to reach out to every single person in need. And number two, but in reality, we can usually reach out more than we think, and it gets easier with practice. Compassion gets easier because it's rewarding, and just like little rats that learn how to navigate their way out of a maze with treats, we humans are motivated by positive reinforcement too. You don't have to believe in karma to understand that physiological, neurological, and hormonal changes occur when we do something kind for someone else. They are scientifically proven. We think that by noticing these physiological and psychological, and we'll throw in moral, rewards of compassion, we're more apt to do good for others because we are more likely to do what feels good. Sure, your Aunt Gail may have noticed you didn't send a thank you note for her wedding gift, but if you haven't spoken to Aunt Gail in 20 years and you find out her second husband Harold has died, you may wonder if you should reach out. She wouldn't necessarily notice if you didn't, but the point is, what would you feel if you did? And finally, while it's pretty obvious, it's worth stating because it's so important to our happiness. Being kind in your relationships makes your relationship stronger and makes you a happier person. All that knowledge should help tilt the scale away from the cons of reaching out, fear, inconvenience, possible awkwardness, toward the pro side, happiness, better relationships, connection, deeper understanding of the human experience. What compassion feels like. So let's say you are feeling heroically ready to be compassionate. Fantastic. In chapters 4, 5, and 6, we explore what compassionate behavior looks like. For now, we explore the nature of compassion, the thing that compels us to inconvenience ourselves, maybe even skip that one really good yoga class with a really good teacher in order to help out someone we care for. At its core, compassion is the acceptance of suffering. That does not mean full detachment, in which you don't give a damn, like, hey, stuff happens, move on. And it's not an intellectual acceptance of suffering that has you looking at someone's personal tragedy through a cold haze of statistics. Well, only 1 out of 5 wind up. Rather, compassion is the acceptance that awful stuff can happen to any of us. In fact, that bad things happen to good people all the time. At the same time, compassion does not mean having a freak out or wincing at somebody's suffering, which feels more like pity than compassion. Acknowledging someone's pain by feeling for them, but not actually feeling with them, is the opposite of supportive compassion. You know what it looks like. Oh, you poor thing. Oh, that's just so sad. People with disabilities and the elderly get this a lot too, as though they have suffered a permanent, chronic, and entirely negative change that makes them someone different. As if their whole personhood has vanished in the face of this awful, horrible thing that they're now living with. Compassion does not equal pity. When you realize that bad things happen to good people, and also that bad things actually happen to you, it creates a connection around suffering that is a two-way relationship between equals. Compassion is not a relationship built on a notion of one always messed up person matched with one always saving the world person. It is built upon each of us being messed up in many points of our lives. Empathy workout. Getting in the well. The greatest comfort comes when we're able to climb down into the well of suffering with a fellow human being. Here are 2 mental tricks to help you get down in there and feel with instead of for. Every time you feel for someone else's pain, imagine a time when you were feeling similarly. Don't dwell on that feeling, but touch upon it briefly and then let that personal pain go, returning to your focus on the other person. Remember, the person you feel sad for is a whole person made up of way more than their current situation. Conjure up their positive qualities like their tenacity, their humor, their work drive, things that you believe will help get them through this shitty or scary time, and that continue to make them a remarkable person. And if you don't know them well, imagine that they have these qualities, because chances are they do. Seeing it in action. Scenario number 1. You see a man in his 70s or 80s moving slowly up a steep hill while walking his dog. There might be a couple of things you can think. Oh, that poor guy is walking with a cane so slowly. It must be hard that it takes so long to get anywhere. I feel so sorry for him. Or, wow, this guy is inspiring. This is a tough hill. I hope I can be like him when I get older. Scenario number 2. You're at a neighborhood party where typically everyone is coupled up, their kids at home with a sitter. A new neighbor shows up who's recently widowed. She heads over to the makeshift wine bar and pours herself some Sauvignon Blanc. You have some options on what to think. Pity her for being alone without a spouse, or feel interested and admire her for her bravery, recalling an instance when, say, you were a chicken shit coward and didn't come to this party last year because your husband Tim was out of town. Feeling inspired by her gumption, you surmise that she's pretty badass, and maybe you even approach her. Not because you're doing her any special favors, but because you respect her choice. You think she's probably pretty cool, and you sympathize with how it feels to come to a party alone. How are compassion and empathy different? The difference between compassion and empathy may seem irrelevant when deciding on whether or not to take a casserole to your sick neighbor, but they are different concepts, and it can be useful to understand the distinction when attempting to cultivate either or both. We'll spare you the scholarly debates about the difference between compassion and empathy and give you our conclusion. We consider compassion to be the heart's natural, instinctive response to the pain of others. It's most likely to occur when you encounter a person in a difficult situation very similar to one you have suffered. You know what it felt like when your husband left you, so you naturally feel compassion for your coworker when the same thing happens to her. Empathy is when you use your imagination to expand your ability to feel compassion for people in situations beyond those you have experienced, maybe even in situations completely different from those you have known. It's a useful mental tool for developing more compassion. Compassion equals notice, feel, respond. Empathy equals compassion plus imagination. Here's an example that might help to make the distinction clear. Imagine that, like Kelsey, you're a breast cancer survivor. Survivors often hear, both directly and indirectly, that they shouldn't worry about recurrence or be afraid of their disease because with the current treatments available, breast cancer isn't as serious as it used to be. As a survivor, you dread hearing this because it diminishes your very real, very scary experience. To you, these fears are more than valid. Now, imagine that you, the breast cancer survivor, are talking with your friend who's getting divorced. This friend is afraid that at age 50 she'll never find love again, but your 55-year-old cousin is fighting men off with a stick. Celebrity magazines are full of women who are dating younger men. And remember Samantha on Sex and the City? Guys everywhere. Plus, your friend is a great catch. So you feel pretty strongly that her fears are unwarranted and maybe even a little irrational. In fact, you're kind of annoyed at having to tend to her feelings of worry, and instead of comforting her, you just want to tell her to stop freaking out about it because she's going to be fine. In this example, it's easy for you to feel compassion for your fellow breast cancer survivor's fears of recurrence, but you don't have a lot of compassion for your divorcing friend's fears that she'll be alone forever. It's one thing to feel for someone who is in a similar situation to us. That's compassion. But feeling for someone in a different situation requires empathy. Empathy is the ability to extract the core experience of a situation we know, which in this case is about fear of the worst-case scenario, and then to use that information to imagine and feel what it might be like to be in a situation that appears entirely different. And the more we practice empathy, the easier it is to access feelings of compassion for people in situations that appear far different from our own. Empathy workout. From compassion to empathy. Here, you can practice using your experience with one kind of situation to imagine how it might feel to go through a seemingly entirely different experience. Think about 3 really tough situations you have been through. It could be miscarriage, loss, illness, breakup, you name it. Now, think about 3 other situations that you maybe have not personally experienced. Could be infertility, divorce, loss of a job, or something very specific going on for someone you know right now. What might the situation you've directly experienced have in common with the one that you haven't? Pair them up and consider these prompts to help you get specific. Loss of community, fear and emotional overwhelm, loss of identity, shame, financial difficulty. The more we employ our empathic imagination, the more we are able to notice and appreciate other people's suffering. We don't need to walk a mile in the other person's shoes to realize when another human being needs support. We simply use our power to notice, feel, respond, and imagine what someone might be going through. Trust. If you care, your care belongs. Most of us recognize that caring is important, yet we still question, does the suffering person even care that I care? And even more vexing, would the suffering, grieving, freaked out person feel like my support is butting in? Chances are you have wrestled with questions like the following. Is it going to be weird if I bring up her mom? What if it's not my place? What if it just upsets her more? A neighbor's spouse died. You don't know his name, but you greet and chit-chat with him. Should you say anything? An old friend from 20 years ago has been diagnosed with cancer. Do you reach out? A colleague you admire just got fired. What can you do to show your support without embarrassing him? Your good friend had a miscarriage. How do you know if she wants to talk about it? There is no algorithm that can exactly specify who is qualified to reach out and when. However, it's safe to say that no matter what your relationship is to someone in a difficult time, the appropriateness of your overture is in great part determined by the values you bring to it. Think about the things that have made you cringe when others have approached you in a time of suffering. The bad moments almost always boil down to you having to deal with people's reactions to your situation. In addition to your own pain, you find yourself contemplating questions like, what if she wants to use my crumbling shit show of a marriage as gossip to feel better about her marriage? What if they think I'm selfish for wanting to pursue IVF? What if he gets all judgy about the cancer treatment I decided on? One thing many of us learn with a lot of tears and regret is that we can't trust our pain and fears with everyone. A lot of us can be judgmental, and a lot of times that's okay. Our opinions are a source of personality. Compassion should not make you vapid. But when it comes to the people around us who are vulnerable, being too judgy about people's pain will make people feel less secure in sharing their personal problems. And that's because people don't want to be blamed for their problems, and they don't want to have to defend their choices. To help you feel like you're a trustworthy person with someone's vulnerability, consider the following. Each time I judge or gossip about someone's pain, anyone who witnesses that will be less likely to entrust me with their pain. Each time I connect with others by judging someone else's pain, I collude with people who likely can't hang with my pain. To help you overcome that judgmental attitude that can creep up on all of us, especially when exasperated, wanting to fill up airtime, or just being plain thoughtless, it happens, we recommend these 3 mantras. I will look at people's personal difficulty with compassion and empathy. I will not judge people for their personal difficulty. I will not gossip about people's personal difficulty. Compassion's F words, foist and fret. The best of values that we bring to helping doesn't prevent some of us from being a tad bit annoying in how we help. To anyone who has seen the "always look for the helpers" quote from Mr. Rogers online, this observation may sound like blasphemy. But there's a big difference between people who are kind and helpful, which is who Fred Rogers is talking about, and chronic helpers. Chronic helpers might be looking to use someone else's needy situation to improve their self-worth. If our desire to help is motivated by insecurity, as described in Chapter 1, then being the perfect helper might be a tempting accolade to pursue. 2 tendencies most exhibit the needy helper that lies within many of us. Foister, someone who pushes themselves onto someone in their difficult time with a lot of advice and unappreciated overtures. Fretter, someone who anxiously reacts with neediness around someone in their difficult time. You don't want a person in pain to feel obligated by your overtures, just supported by them. Both the fretter and foister place a lot of emphasis on their own helping abilities, but while foisters are narcissistic, that is, unable to see the needs of the suffering person, and are largely concerned with their own opinions and agendas, fretters are acutely attuned to the facial expressions and emotions of people who are in pain. They just feel incapable of helping them through it without a lot of assurance that they're doing a great job. A buckwheat pillow would be really good for you. How many pillows would you like? Do you have some favorites? What if I prop them up like this? How does that work? Is it okay? Or would they be better like this? Or I can just run out and get some new ones? You might recognize yourself as a fretter if you find yourself asking a lot of very specific questions of the person in need about how to help, and asking for assurance on how you are already helpful. Don't be surprised if you, a reader of this very kind of book, find yourself identifying with this tendency. Both of us do too. You might recognize yourself as a foister if you tend to feel that others are ungrateful for your help. You might feel offended by people not taking your well-meaning advice or following up on resources that you provided, or feel unappreciated when people in crisis are not texting or phoning you back. You might notice that people shut down, stop sharing feelings with you, and possibly avoid you. Many of us are fretters or foisters. It's good to want to give effective care to our loved ones, so don't feel bad if you recognize either of these tendencies in your help. But if you want to do things a little differently, and likely more effectively, here are some options. Foister. Instead of, "Why didn't you tell me?" try, "I am so sorry. How are you?" Instead of, "I really think you'd feel better if you came to the annual family picnic. Don't let all those babies get to you. Maybe it will even boost your fertility levels." Try, "Since being around kids is so hard right now, but it's really important that you be a part of this, would you want to help me decorate the place beforehand?" Instead of, "Don't be such a downer. You should come out with us. It'll be fun. This will be good for you." Try, "If you're not up for socializing, can I come by with a trashy movie and we can just not talk much?" Fretter. Instead of, "I called you yesterday and didn't hear back from you. I just need you to phone me and let me know that everything is all right." Try, "I'm just leaving you a message, text, email, to say hello. No need to call me back." Instead of, "I didn't hear back from you. Did you get my package?" Try not mentioning the package and just presume it arrived. Instead of, "I wanted to get you a pair of slippers for the hospital, but I didn't know what color you'd like or if wool was okay. Is it okay that I didn't get you anything, or can I get you something else?" Try this. Buy the slippers and hope the thought itself is appreciated. You don't care if they wind up in the hands of someone else at Goodwill. Instead of, "I was hoping to get you a gift certificate from a local restaurant. What's the nearest one to you? Do they deliver? How much should it be for?" Try this. Look up the important information, don't sweat the details, and just send the certificate. But be clear on any diet restrictions first. Trust. Sometimes we don't care. Not enough, anyway. It's true. As we mentioned earlier in the example of Emily and her neighbor, the new parent, sometimes we're not affected by someone's hardship enough to inconvenience ourselves for them. We couldn't go on with the daily routines of our lives if we reached out to every person with a hint of suffering in our day. That's normal. Sometimes we care, but for the wrong reasons, like when there's a tiny bit of satisfaction in witnessing someone else's downfall, or when we just want details for the sake of knowing them. Such situations are not nice, but none of us is nice all the time. It's just important that we know when we're not feeling like doing the right thing, and in those cases, it's best to stay away from the situation. If, on the other hand, you've always felt for your neighbor Susie, for example, who never sweated through her yoga pants, always kept her kids in matching outfits, and managed a high-powered career, yet often seemed a bit unhappy and pressed to be perfect, you may find yourself deeply caring when her life unravels in divorce. Maybe because you've been there yourself when you lost your job and learned that nothing in life is like it's supposed to be, and what it feels like to publicly fail. Well, then, maybe you can reach out. Even if you're just a neighbor, you're actually more than that. You're someone who genuinely cares, so trust that. Trust and compassion for yourself. We all benefit from feeling more compassion for others. There are exceptions, however, and that's why in Kelsey's empathy boot camps, there is considerable discussion on how much help we can actually give. 3 instances should give us pause before diving in to help someone else. 1, sometimes life gets in the way, and crises often happen at the most inconvenient times. Your work colleague finds out she has cancer right before a major product launch. Your best friend's relationship is crumbling when you have a major deadline. Just when it feels extra challenging to take care of ourselves, we're sometimes called upon to take care of others. And when we're stressed, research shows we are less likely to feel empathy for other people. 2, the person you care about is actually really hard to care for. Their issues, like with major mental illness, addiction, and dementia, for example, are way more emotionally and financially demanding than you, a normal human being, can handle. 3, there are people in our lives who are takers, who will always want more than we can reasonably give. They are, as personal development author Mark Manson calls them, emotional vampires, people who have no filter on their emotions for even the smallest of life's grievances. They are always wronged, always disappointed in others, and they are really hard people to give to. In these moments, show compassion for yourself. Recognize that maybe you, A, can't do it all, or B, don't want to do it all. Not because you hate being inconvenienced, since helping others will always be at least a tad inconvenient, but because you recognize you can't give without feeling depleted and thus resentful. Use the following cues to help guide your caring actions for others and your caring actions for yourself. Notice what's going on inside of you. Your irritation might not be the result of any real demands of the suffering person. They may have asked for nothing at all. It might simply be about the current level of stress you feel in your own life. Take a moment to notice your stress. Is it impacting your empathy? A few deep breaths can de-escalate your stress-induced irritation at someone else's suffering. Take a moment for self-inventory. What do I feel prepared to do for this person? Recognize that this notion can change over time. What do I feel obligated to do for this person versus what I want to do for this person? And practice this mindset. I am not obliged to do this. I want to do this. Take a listen to Chapter 5. We describe ways to limit the pressure of what you feel you should do and give you ways to think about what you can do easily and without undue stress. If you want to be there for others, to honor or maybe even deepen your relationships, consider how to offer a level of support that will help you do those things. However, you should also feel entitled to set limits on caring for people. It's perfectly reasonable to recognize that you can't give everything that you think you should give. What's more, you can't always give what others think you should give. Kelsey says, there are people in our lives with really big chronic problems, addiction, severe mental illness, dementia, you name it. When there is deep love for people who are in deep pain, our natural instinct is to want to fix it, no matter at what personal cost. For years, I struggled with the competing feelings of guilt, love, and anger that had me questioning every day what I could do to help my mother who had severe mental illness. Our book can't adequately help you deal with this level of crisis. We can only acknowledge the real difficulty of your situation. To help you figure out a way forward, try seeking out help from professionals. A lifesaver for me, a self-proclaimed non-joiner, was joining a support group for people who shared my situation. I found understanding and much-needed forgiveness for fumbling in a less-than-perfect, oftentimes horrible, situation. The bottom line, being yourself is perfect enough. Compassion for others isn't fully possible if we don't also have compassion for ourselves. Nobody is perfect. Not you, not the people you lean on to get your own support. Being kind does not mean you are not allowed to also be a fretter or a foister. You may have big problems setting boundaries, or you may have a really full, stressful life right now, which makes it really hard to change or add something to your routine. What we really hope is for you to simply feel more aware of the human tendencies that can get in the way of fully expressing compassion. Stress in the face of inconvenience, fear of setting boundaries, and pressure to do things perfectly. If we are to fully give, we must do so by first giving compassion to ourselves. Because what someone in crisis really needs is not your skilled perfection, but you. Chapter 4. Listening speaks volumes. My dad asked questions like, can you hang in there? Can you go to counseling? He was trying to explore things I could do for the marriage to work it out, as opposed to just being receptive and listening. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Tina, who went through a divorce. Victoria was married to a cheater. It wasn't her fault, but there it was, plain and simple. Her husband, the cad. How long had she known? Well, she'd been married to Doug 7 years. 6 years earlier, he'd passed out on the couch with his laptop open and a beer in hand. She'd gone over, fondly, to cover him up, and there it was, for everyone to see. Tuesday at lunch, Airport Sheridan. Miss you, big boy. Suzanne. Victoria had closed the browser and put the computer away. She'd never mentioned it, but when she would periodically check his email over the years, there were other women, too. Carissa, Heather, Molly. Was she pathetic? Her sister certainly thought so. Your husband is terrible. He cheats. And what's this $11,000 credit card bill? What the hell is he buying for $11,000? He's not spending it on you. Your shirt is from Target. What should I do? Get a divorce. At year 8, Victoria thought maybe having children would help, but they were now $60,000 in debt, and something needed to shock this guy into finding a steady job. She decided to bring it up over pot roast, Doug's favorite. Doug came in, kissed her, and had 2 servings. I think we should have a baby, Victoria said, heart-pounding. Doug blinked. But, honey, I'm leaving you for Dorothy, Doug said. So there you go. Victoria had her answer. Divorce. After months of legal hassles, gradually setting out on her own and feeling like a wreck every day, an unexpected old friend reemerged. Anna. Victoria had sort of forgotten about Anna. They had known each other in college and stayed in touch, off and on. Anna had been a brash, out-there sort of person who always dragged people to dance class, but when Anna heard Victoria was going through a divorce, she came over with lasagna and a magnum of yellowtail and stayed the night. What you don't need, Anna said, is an empty house. Anna was twice divorced, a connoisseur. Victoria had to admit Anna was right. The emptiness of her house mocked her constantly. The quiet was another form of sadness, ever blooming. So Anna kept coming over, and Victoria kept letting her. Anna brought burritos, macaroni, baked ziti, and potatoes au gratin. They would hang out in the kitchen and have tea. Anna didn't tell Victoria that Doug was an ass or that she had wasted her youth. You married him, after all, Anna said. There must have been something good. Victoria nodded. There were good things, which is why she so often found herself sobbing to her old friend. Victoria knew she was better without him, but it didn't feel that way. Anna said it wouldn't, not for a long, long time. But then it would, she said. After a long while, Victoria made the choice to believe her. Knowing how bad it can feel to hear the wrong thing and how easy it can be to say the wrong thing, many of us would rather remain silent and walk away from an emotionally difficult situation. Even if we know from experience how comforting it can be to have someone to talk to, when we're in the position to provide such comfort, that conversation can easily feel too overwhelming to handle. Thankfully, these conversations get much easier with practice, and they can pretty much guarantee us the absolute best way to build deep, trusting, unshakable relationships, the kind most of us can use more of. Meet our second touchstone of showing up. Listening speaks volumes. The best way to have a conversation with someone in a difficult time is not in the talking, but in the listening. And thankfully, it's much easier to listen than it is to find that elusive, useful thing to say. As the mom of a child with cystic fibrosis told us, people think that by listening, they aren't contributing to the conversation. Totally wrong. Listening to me talk about this horrible disease is one of the biggest gifts that I can receive. The enormous value of listening is probably not news to most of us, but when the shit hits the fan and your friend is in pain, how can I make this better is a totally natural reaction. It's instinctive to want to say something, anything, in the hopes that you might improve the situation. You'll come out of this even stronger. This is just like the time I got food poisoning on that cruise. I mean, at least it's not cancer. What did the lab results say? How are you going to handle the kids? You should try a raw food diet. Or acupuncture, probably both. Yet before diving into rescue mode with advice, alternative ways of looking at things, or asking a lot of clarifying questions, all the things you want to be really cautious about doing, communication experts advise getting to a place of what they call emotional resonance. Remember our discussion of emotional resonance in Chapter 3? That means using the act of listening to tune in to how someone is feeling about her situation. Ask people what matters most about listening, and they will inevitably tell you it's having someone hear your experience without judgment. What's more, listening actually helps a person better understand their experience in the course of telling it. One man from an empathy boot camp put it this way: as the relationship with my wife started to go south, my family and friends listened to me patiently over many years. I had to talk it through several times ad nauseum in order to come to the best decision about what to do. Learning to shut up. The first thing to get really good at when wanting to listen is also probably the biggest hurdle to listening, which is sitting dumbly quiet while someone else talks. While you're listening, you're focused entirely on what the person is saying, and you're not simultaneously thinking about how you're going to respond. Yes, this is a crazy notion for many of us. In most cases, this is the best kind of listening we can do. So after your friend shares a piece of bad or scary news, practice waiting 3 seconds before responding. This sounds like a short amount of time, but in reality, it can feel like an eternity if you're not used to it. So prepare to exercise restraint and prepare for uncomfortable silence. When the silence of listening is uncomfortable, it's not because silence is a problem. It's because you aren't used to it. A couple of things may happen. Either the silence continues, and you both learn that sitting together in the introspective quiet, feeling how life can be hard, is actually pretty profound and amazing, rather than shallow and awkward. Or your friend may very well fill up the silence by talking even more about what is going on. Either thing encourages authentic communication. To help you learn to listen better, we'll first do an inventory of some normal, common go-to responses that many of us lean on. What kind of non-listener are you? Emily has a tendency toward sage/epidemiologist. Kelsey leans toward doomsayer. The sage gives wise perspective and advice when it wasn't asked for. The optimist always offers a bright-sided perspective. The doomsayer reacts with alarm to any situation, bringing up other alarming situations. The epidemiologist asks a lot of clarifying fact-based questions before learning how someone is feeling. The all-about-me, in an effort to relate, makes the conversation all about his or her situation and problems. Next time you are listening to someone, about pretty much anything, take note of how you tend to respond, especially if what's being shared is a vulnerable topic. And take heart. We all have at least one of the non-listener tendencies, and we discuss them in greater detail in this chapter and the next. Then, just practice not doing that thing you normally do. You know what comes next. Just stay quiet for 3 whole seconds and listen. Empathy workout. Listen to a friend. Find a friend and practice this skill. Spend 2 minutes each sharing a story of something difficult that has happened in your life. You might want to start by picking something not emotionally charged right now, but something that was a big deal in the past. Here are the rules. The listener, absolutely no talking of any kind, even if it's just clarifying questions. You can nod and show in your face that you hear, but remember, bear the awkward silence. The talker. Share your story and proceed on with it, even if the silence is a little unnerving. After each of you has shared your story, consider these questions. For the talker, How did it feel to have the space to tell your story without interruption? Did the listener do something that helped you relax? How about something that made you uncomfortable? What is especially powerful about being listened to, especially when it's not an artificial exercise? For the listener, were there times you wanted to jump in and say something while the other person was talking? What did you feel compelled to say? This is also a really good way to identify your go-to non-listening responses. What was it like to stay silent throughout the story? What concerns about staying quiet did you have? What benefit did you get out of listening? Empathy tip. Don't worry, if you don't have an official listening partner to do this exercise with, you still have a lot of opportunities to practice listening. When you actually decide to cultivate a practice of listening, you will find listening opportunities all around you. There might be a work colleague describing her return from maternity leave, or a friend who is complaining about a disagreement with his neighbor. Either would be a perfect opportunity to practice listening. Even in these seemingly light circumstances, you can ask some variant of, "How is that for you?" and stay quiet for 3 seconds to see what comes up. Types of listening. The kind of listening we just described, being quiet and letting the other person talk until they have finished talking, is a lot of what really good listening is about and is called empathic listening. Research shows that empathic listening is the most valuable kind. It establishes connection and trust and encourages people to really open up. It helps us tune in emotionally to how someone is feeling, and it involves 95% silence on our part. We may ask a few prompts that encourage more sharing, which we describe in more detail in the next section. It may also include nodding your head when something resonates. Mostly, however, it means encouraging someone to talk, and when she stops, allowing for 3 whole seconds of silence before you talk. This allows time for anything else she wants to say to come up, which often happens after a brief period of silence. If you jump in too soon, you may prevent her from expressing everything she wants to say. In action, the goal of empathic listening is to affect people in this way. In my grief, even good advice couldn't help. Only listening did. My college roommate had lost her father years before. With her, I never felt pressure to be in a different place. She often said nothing. She just let me be in the sadness, feel it, breathe it. I had to fully let it in to let it go. Dara, who lost her mother. There are 2 secondary kinds of listening that we may need to engage in when supporting someone. Fact-finding listening. In fact-finding listening, we want to remember what's being said because the information is useful. In a casual situation, a friend may be sharing a recipe or the name of a really good movie. We listen to remember facts that we'll need to call on in the future. In the context of hard times, this might mean getting to know the specifics of a situation to help this person later on, whether that's through relaying information to others, finding them a resource, or just because we plan on being supportive in future conversations and want to get a good handle on the situation. But when fact-finding, there should be a lot of room for caution. In Kelsey's empathy boot camps, when people engage in a listening exercise and are quiet for 2 whole minutes while someone else shares their story, 2 things inevitably happen. 1, some people can't resist asking clarifying questions, and 2, the feedback from the talkers is that this clarifying behavior is annoying. Of course, we feel well-intentioned when asking questions because we want our response to be grounded in a solid understanding of the situation. But this kind of listening can get in the way of sharing because, 1, people often are looking to unload more than they are looking for a particular response. 2, fact-finding questions can divert the conversation away from what a person really wants to talk about to what the asking person wants to know. And 3, fact-finding conversations create a detached clinical portrayal of the problem rather than an emotional one. Getting the facts can be important to your helping in the long term, but you don't usually need a lot of specific facts to comfort someone. When you do ask clarifying questions or seek information for future reference, be sure you've established some kind of trust with empathic listening first. Critical listening. In critical listening, our main goal is to analyze and evaluate what we hear. Critical listening helps us form an opinion and make a judgment and might even include a healthy amount of debate. It's something we do a lot of at work and sometimes at brunch, but it's only occasionally helpful in the context of someone experiencing a difficult time. Critical listening in this type of scenario might involve the listener describing his own perception of the situation the person is struggling with. It seems to me like... Or it might involve the listener coming up with some explanation for why something is happening and overall provide a perspective that the suffering person may not have. Use this listening skill with even more restraint than you would fact-finding. People can very easily experience your different perspective on a situation as a negative judgment about the perspective they already hold. That's a perfectly normal dialogue over bottomless mimosas or in a meeting. But when someone is hurting and is extra sensitive, this kind of perceived judgment can be off-putting and hurtful. Only do this when invited, and even then, use extreme caution. Empathy tip. If you are a trusted person in someone's life, you can learn what kind of listening to best use by asking this one question. Do you want comfort or truth? If they just want comfort, use your empathic listening skills. If they want truth, help them with some honest evaluating. Be sure to employ some empathic listening first to tune into what they are feeling emotionally. That will help bolster feelings of trust when it comes to any evaluative insights you may have to offer. Conversational openers, ways to emotionally connect and learn more. Now that you've got a grasp of listening, let's bring in the second, smaller, yet harder part of a conversation, talking. Knowing what to say and when to say it starts with these two very simple principles of supportive communication. Number 1, you can't solve the problem. Number 2, you'll never know how they feel. You can't solve the problem, and you don't need to. The kind of mistakes we tend to make while trying to help people can be traced to a lesson we all learned very early in life. Loss is intolerable. When someone close to us suffers a loss, whether it's of a person, a former normal life of being healthy, married, or employed, or an acknowledgement of what will never come, like a biological baby, often our first instinct is to help solve the problem. We say things like, just give it time, or you'll have a new fill-in-the-blank baby, job, partner in no time, or have you tried? You're still young, you should try online dating. This approach works very well if someone loses their iPhone. It really doesn't work if someone suffers a major loss. In many cases, a grieving person will never go back to normal because their entire life has changed and there's no normal to go back to. In these intensely difficult situations, ones that have no solution, many of our default responses to be helpful just aren't appropriate. We have all had that sensation of looking at someone sharing a personal difficulty, and in response to our efforts to fix the problem with solutions or alternative ways of looking at things, we begin to see their eyes gaze down and their arms fold across their chests. We see they are shutting down, and we feel tongue-tied, fumbling to say something, anything, to make our embarrassment stop, which often leads to us pontificating even more. In turn, our friend feels like they've just had their suffering micromanaged. And as anyone who's ever been micromanaged knows, it's really not fun. You'll never know how they feel. If you've participated in life, you've suffered to some degree. Yet, despite our shared experiences, everyone goes through loss differently. Just because you're empathizing with someone doesn't mean you'll ever be able to know exactly how they feel. I know how you feel is a common saying we use to make someone feel better. Unless we're taught otherwise, it's one of those default, this is what you're supposed to say phrases that we grow up believing is true and useful. However, the point of empathy is not to mirror the exact experience of someone else. Empathy gives you insight into the experience of true suffering and fear and an inkling of what that might feel like. But saying, I know how you feel, can sound dismissive of that suffering person's own unique experience. Not one experience is like another. An illness immediately following the initial diagnosis is a very different experience from that same illness 10 years out. Divorce, for some people, is absolutely devastating. For others, it's a relief and a reason to throw a party. Any one event at any particular point in time for each individual can include a whole range of emotions, including, but not limited to, grief, numbness, acceptance, anger, fear, despair, excitement. What is the person you care about actually feeling? Even if you've been through something similar, you don't really know until you ask. But we know asking can be hard. Here are some places to start. Try asking, how are you? This sounds so basic, but in practice, many of us struggle with asking someone how they are doing. Depending on your relationship, you may feel unsure about how close you need to be with a person to ask how they're doing. Human nature is fickle, and you'll have to rely on your gut instinct, which, if you're scared of conversations like these, will likely tell you not to pry. As you get more practiced at this, your judgment about whether to ask will improve, and you'll feel comfortable asking more often. Just remember, no one dies from being asked, how are you? It can be scary to ask, but it's also true that no one has been critically injured by the question, how are you? Most people, even those who don't care to respond with an honest answer, will appreciate it. How are you is literally the most basic of follow-up questions because it, 1, acknowledges that you remember and care about what's going on, yet 2, doesn't require a long commitment to a conversation if a grieving person doesn't want to give it. Take note of what one woman told us about her colleague's response to the loss of her mother. After I returned to work, no one ever spoke of what had happened. That was fine from people I didn't work closely with, but even though I understood it was probably just awkward, it was still hurtful from people I had considered friends. When to avoid how are you? How are you is a great way to open up a conversation, but there are times when it's a pretty safe bet that asking how somebody is will drive them crazy. This is especially true when the person you are asking is clearly distraught or in the first few days or weeks of a significant tragedy and still in crisis. Asking the question in these times might seem to suggest that a person could be feeling any other way than horrible, and that's not very comforting to someone in distress. If someone's wife just died, or they were just diagnosed with a brain tumor, and you ask them, "How are you doing?" they may well reply with some version of, "How the fuck do you think I'm doing?" which in all honesty is a fair response. One man told Kelsey the story of a sister-in-law who lost her baby to sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. In the days after the tragedy, with the entire family at home with her, his sister-in-law put a sign on her door about things to do and not do. What was the first item on the list? Don't ask us how we are. Sometimes, especially in the initial days of a major trauma, the answer to that question is just too painfully obvious. How hard to press? When someone is in pain, we can ask ourselves, how hard should I press for an honest answer? The good news is you don't need a psych degree to get people to open up. Everyone deals with trauma in their own way, and some people just don't like to talk about their feelings. Moreover, who knows what else might be happening in someone's life? Your friend might be sick of answering questions, or just not feeling well, or simply exhausted. An answer of fine is probably not about you, so don't take it personally. But here's another strong reason someone might not open up. They might not believe you want the real story. A woman who had a miscarriage told Kelsey, "My close family didn't bring up the loss unless I did. It would have helped me to talk about it openly if they had asked more questions and checked in more directly to see how I was feeling." Once you feel good about the intention of asking, "How are you?" here are a couple of things you can say that convey your true interest in hearing a person open up, but without being pushy. Number 1, what's that like for you? Or how's that going for you? Practice this regularly. What's that like for you is a great question in lieu of how are you because it gives people even wider latitude for responding. That's because it could be that the person in need is obsessing over their health insurance or attorney fees or even about finding a moment of peace rather than their deepest feelings. Number 2, how are you today? Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook and author of Lean In, shared in a Facebook post examples of human connection during her immediate time of grief after the sudden loss of her husband. She wrote, "Even a simple 'how are you,' almost always asked with the best of intentions, is better replaced with 'how are you today?' because the person knows that the best I can do right now is to get through each day." Adding the word "today" to your question acknowledges that, overall, you understand the person's life is difficult, and you're not expecting to hear a pat answer that everything is fine, that there are good days and bad days. Okay, good hours and bad hours. And it turns an overwhelming question, "How am I doing with my cancer diagnosis and life overall?" into a totally manageable one. How am I feeling today? How do I bring it up later without making it weird? When encountering someone several months or more after their difficulty, a variant of asking about today is asking, "How are you feeling now?" Asking about now allows someone to express feelings and even perspectives about their loss that can be quite different from those experienced at the initial time of loss. Seeing it in action. Let's imagine you run into Hope, a friend you haven't seen for 2 years, at the mall, and ask her generally, "You, how are you?" Hope: "Fine, thanks. I don't know if you heard that I finished treatment for breast cancer a year ago." You have 3 options for a response. 1, "I am so sorry," making Hope feel pitied for a condition that may not bother her as much as it once did. 2, pretend like you didn't hear her and say, "And what else is new?" 3, ask, "How are you doing with your diagnosis now?" You may think that asking someone how they are doing about their situation will add an extra hour to the conversation, time that maybe you don't have. But what you will find instead is that it probably just adds on an extra 15 to 20 seconds. And we think that time is well worth what you get back in a moment of real dialogue. Besides, if the person mentioned it in the first place, they won't mind you asking and probably even want to talk about it. When it's been a while, with almost any kind of transition, feel free to ask, how are you doing with it now? It's about curiosity. Asking, how are you, is less about the 3 words you're asking, and much more about showing a genuine interest in how someone else is feeling and what they are thinking. And many times, that may mean that what's required is not the exact words, how are you, but something more specific that still gets you at the heart of what the person you are supporting thinks and feels, and not you. See what we mean with this example. Seeing it in action. Jenny. I am struggling with telling John that I want a divorce. Lisa. Oh, I know just how you feel. When I told my ex-husband about wanting a divorce, I was afraid he'd leave me bankrupt. Let's break this down. In fact, Jenny is struggling to tell John because he has been depressed for several years and she doesn't want this divorce to push him over the edge. Now, Jenny doesn't know whether to tell Lisa this or whether to let Lisa's false impression of the situation persist. Let's try this again. Jenny. I am struggling with telling John that I want a divorce. Lisa. What's the struggle about? Here, Lisa is convinced that finances are the source of the problem, but she resists sharing her theory and instead asks Jenny what the struggle is about. This is a very specific form of how are you that involves asking a follow-up question to information that was already provided. Jenny. Well, to be honest, he's been in a bad place emotionally for a long time, and I'm afraid this news might push him over the edge. This time around, Lisa may be surprised by Jenny's answer, but she gets to hear and connect over Jenny's true story. Practice listening for clues into what someone is already telling you about how they feel, and simply follow that up with what's the insert a version of the word the talker used about. Ways to make the conversation supportive. Just say, I'm sorry. When we do feel compassion for someone's difficulty, and it seems to be a fair bet that that person is feeling like the situation they are in is pretty crappy, then a big start in the direction of reaching out with supportive kindness, and sometimes all we ever need to do, is to say the words, I'm sorry. When we are in the position of knowing someone's sorrow, then trust that I'm sorry covers a lot more ground than you'd think. With just 2 words, you can elegantly suggest both concern and sympathy. If this sorry is delivered with compassion and not with pity, then it's a validation of pain with no other agenda. And often, that acknowledgement of pain is all a suffering person needs. Saying I'm sorry is so easy you probably don't believe you can get away with it. How could it be okay to respond to something as heavy as a death with 2 words? Trust us. You actually can. Even if all you do is communicate I'm sorry in a card or even on social media with no follow-up questions or commentary, you are doing more than fine. Sometimes you might wonder if you have enough of a relationship to even say I'm sorry. The answer is yes, 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 always. Colleagues, yes. Neighbors, yes. Even that guy next to you on the plane who's telling you he's flying to a funeral. I'm sorry. Just say it. You're acknowledging another human being's pain. You don't need an engraved invitation to entitle you to do that. Then there are times to not say, I'm sorry. Sorry. Yes, this is another expression like how are you doing? It's the best thing to say, sometimes. Life is fickle, and unfortunately we don't always know that saying I'm sorry is appropriate. If we have expressed our condolences to someone who says they are just fine, recoiling at our pity, it can make us feel embarrassed. It's not a tremendous problem when it happens, but one way out of it is to go back to the principle that you never really know how someone feels, and just ask a person how they're doing with the experience. Seeing it in action. Kelsey says, this scene really happened to me with my friend and neighborhood butcher, Angela. Kelsey. Hi, Angela. How's it going? Angela. Well, Josephine and I are getting divorced. Kelsey. Wow, I'm so sorry. That must be really difficult. Here, Angela has a couple of options. Say, that's okay, I am actually quite happy about it, which is what she did say in real life. And in real life, I responded awkwardly, I am sorry, I said I am sorry. Or Angela can just say thanks and not acknowledge how she really feels. To help Angela describe her true feelings, instead of saying, "I'm sorry," I could have asked something like, "How's that going for you?" and opened myself up to actually listen. Since embarking on this work, I have become a lot less quick to offer condolences and a lot more ready to ask someone how they are feeling about their news. I'm often surprised at the answers. Friends who feel optimistic about a cancer diagnosis, or a person who is hopeful about their divorce. In many of these instances, I would have simply said, "I'm sorry." I now ask, "What's that like for you?" Or variants like, "How's that going?" or "How do you feel about it?" If I intuit it's not feeling good, I might say, "That can be hard," to give room to describe it that way if it is, but without presuming it's hard for that particular person who might say that for them it isn't. Asking takes a couple of times of self-conscious effort, but once you see how easy it is and how well it works for getting to hear other people's experience, which is always far more interesting than what you imagined, you'll begin to do it effortlessly. Hey, listen. Sometimes responses to our condolence like, "Thanks, but I'm okay," or "Why, you didn't cause it," can make us feel like we made a big empathy misstep and might also make us gun-shy about offering condolences in the future. If someone responds that they're okay, that doesn't actually mean they don't appreciate the spirit of your condolence. It just means you opened up an opportunity for them to say how they're really feeling about it, and they may very well appreciate that, even if they say they're fine. If someone does seem hostile about your overture, that response is really about where they're at emotionally with their situation, and very likely has nothing to do with you. Allow for some irrationality. When your friend's life turns upside down, it's not uncommon that they will act a little nuts, but what about someone going totally crazy? If you have a friend who is doing things that are truly dangerous or potentially disastrous to him or herself or others, then definitely get some advice from other people, including professionals. It's important to know, however, the difference between something truly destructive and good old-fashioned irrational decision-making. The latter is often a normal part of the pain process. Your newly divorced pal blew off work for a week to watch The Real Housewives of every city. Cool. Your friend with cancer impulse bought a Porsche. Yay. Your middle-aged cousin slept with her 23-year-old trainer the day after her mom died? Great job. Responses like, "You deserve it," and "I'll tell you when I'm worried about it," can be supportive in helping your friend feel entitled to a dose of exuberant self-care when she needs it. A periodic check-in or follow-up does come in handy to see if someone's normal irrational behavior is bordering on something to really worry about. If you're at all concerned, don't be afraid to seek the advice of other people who know what's going on. Remember, you're a kind and caring friend, not a trained professional, unless you really are. This happened to me, too. Bad times can make us feel alone and even ashamed. Knowing that someone we admire has gone through something similar can make us feel less alone, less like a singular personal failure, and even hopeful that, like this person, we can survive the situation, too. Like we discussed earlier in this chapter, however, remember, just because you have experienced the same thing as someone else does not mean you know how they feel. People don't need you to share their exact same feelings down to the molecular level. They just want to know you have been through something similar and they're not alone. Seeing it in action. John lost a parent to suicide, a situation Sandy had experienced in her own life. "Sandy, I am so sorry to hear about your father's suicide. My mother took her own life 5 years ago." Sandy has a few options to complete her end of the conversation. 1, tell John more about her experience. 2, ask John about his experience. 3, say, "I'm sorry. I'm here if you need to talk." John might take comfort in knowing Sandy has had a similar experience, but Sandy should exercise the following guidelines. Share her personal story only if the person is not in crisis. Make sure the person in crisis gets to share his personal story. Make sure she is only doing 10% of the talking, and then redirect back to John so she doesn't share more about her experience unless she's asked. And even if asked, she keeps it short and sweet and redirects back yet again to John. I have faith in you. There is nothing quite so daunting as the steep learning curve that comes with life's most critical times. Whether it's loss, illness, infertility, or divorce, there are often a ton of medical, financial, and legal decisions to make that have us feeling profoundly ill-equipped and incompetent. Equally true, there is nothing like the insecurity of being forced into or opting to take on a new, different life that comes with major change like divorce, job transition, loss, or having a child with special health needs. Because all these factors cause us to fear a loss of community, identity, economic security, and our general capacity to cope. That's why, in these times, it's really important to express your faith in a person's ability to manage their situation. Even if you feel or understand their fears, if you believe this person is overall a competent, sound person with good judgment, now is the time to let them know that. One woman who was contemplating divorce said what supportive words helped her most were, "My friend said that she trusted I would know what was the best course of action." Emily says, "My father-in-law recently died at home of lung cancer just a few months after his diagnosis. I flew up to visit with the intention of saying goodbye to him and staying for a week to help my mother-in-law with errands and organizing. However, he went downhill very quickly after I arrived, and my mother-in-law and I were thrown into the roles of round-the-clock caregiving for what would be the last 2 weeks of his life. I'd never been in that situation, and I definitely didn't know what I was doing. A few days before he died, one of his family members, who I'd never met before, came in for a visit. Before she left, she said to me with a laugh, 'You know, you might be the most competent person I've ever met in my life. LOL. In that moment, I'd been feeling pretty far from competent, and her confidence in my ability to handle the situation was an invaluable boost when I really needed it. Seeing it in action. Maria, an attorney who has been stably employed with the government for 10 years, just quit her job and is talking to her sister, Michelle. Maria, I can't believe I did this. What if I can't find something else instead? Michelle, why did you quit your job? It's a pretty tough market. Maria, I don't know. I'm such an idiot. Maria doesn't have a history of quitting jobs and is someone Michelle has always admired for her tenacity and maturity. But that doesn't stop Michelle from questioning Maria's judgment and making Maria feel insecure about handling a tough job search. Michelle's fears for Maria may be rational, but the point is they don't help and only burden her with more doubt. Let's try this again. Michelle, I can imagine it's scary. Here, Michelle validates Maria's fears. But I trust your judgment, and I'm confident you will find a new job with a better fit. Here, she emboldens Maria with confidence based on what she knows about Maria to be true. Is there anything I can do to help, like read your resume or pass it on to folks? Here, she is offering concrete, tangible help. Focus on someone's feelings, not just the facts. When you see someone after their first encounter with an ex, it's natural to want to lead with, is he dating anyone? But drilling for the facts without finding out how the person is feeling about them can be a diversion away from the emotional hard stuff. This is a good example of fact-finding listening from earlier in the chapter. So instead, try asking, how did it feel, or how was it to see him after so much time has passed? A woman with infertility described it like this. Everyone kept asking me about the medical process. No one seemed to get that I was hurting inside. Seeing it in action. Millicent just had a doctor's appointment in which she learned more about why she's not getting pregnant. She is sharing the news with her sister Deirdre. Millicent. Just got back from the doctor. It turns out there's an issue. Deirdre. What is it? Millicent. They say I'm going through early menopause. Deirdre. What does that mean? Millicent explains the details. Deirdre. Wow, how does that happen? Millicent tries to explain with limited knowledge. Deirdre. Have you considered a second opinion? Breakdown. Deirdre has learned some of the facts, but she doesn't know how Millicent feels about them, which is at the heart of support in difficult times. To be even more supportive, Deirdre can take the opportunity to practice empathic listening, establish some emotional resonance, and hear how Millicent is doing with the news. Deirdre. So what does that mean for getting pregnant? Millicent explains. Deirdre. Wow. How are you feeling? Here, Deirdre is giving Millicent an opportunity to reflect on the true impact of the news, which has to do with Millicent's hopes for having a baby. This gives Millicent a chance to share her feelings and receive support. Millicent. I don't know. I feel kind of stunned, hopeless, really. Millicent describes more here. Hopeful stories. Helpful most of the time. Obviously, a terrifying factor for someone going through a hard time is the fear of the unknown. If someone is sick, for example, we just don't know what's going to happen. The situation is beyond our control, which is hard for any human being. It's natural to want to help out your friend by giving them hope. There's a fine line, though, between helping someone feel less daunted and belittling their very real, warranted fear and anger with, "You'll be fine." Kelsey is a pessimist by nature, and positive stories can make her queasy. Yet when she got breast cancer, she actually found that she liked hopeful stories about situations like hers, as did Emily. It was reassuring to hear real stories of people who had suffered the same diagnosis and survived. But it's a complicated subject. Make sure your hopeful story is real and actually happened to someone you know. A thing you read on the internet doesn't count. That said, well-founded stories of hope can be incredibly helpful. If you have your own or somebody else's positive story about a difficult time and it truly relates, then by all means share it. Here are some examples. Instead of, "You will get pregnant," try, "My friend got pregnant on her 3rd try with IVF." Instead of, "There are other fish in the sea," try, "You are an amazing, beautiful person, and you deserve someone as awesome as you are." Instead of, "Samantha on that show Sex and the City ran her first marathon while on chemo," try, "It's a unique experience for everyone. My sister was able to keep working through most of it, and that's my hope for you." Instead of, "A divorce is not a big deal. Everyone gets divorced these days. Don't worry about it." Try, "For what it's worth, I was really surprised by my parents' understanding, but every situation is unique." Instead of, "If you eat unprocessed food and get enough rest, your body will know what to do," try, "My friend had 3 miscarriages, and her 4th pregnancy is now a walking toddler." I care. I love you. Remember how burdensome and unlovable a person in need can feel? There's nothing like being in a shitty or scary time and hearing from others that they love you. In person, via text or email, written on a cake, however and how often you can do it. Say, "I love, admire, respect you," or express whatever kind of adoration you actually have for a person. It can't go wrong, and it's sorely needed and deeply appreciated. List of go-to phrases. Keep these in your back pocket for whenever you need them. Do you want to talk about it? It's not boring. I want to hear. What's that like for you? How are you doing now? This must be hard, but you're doing great. I trust you to do the right thing. I've seen you get through hard things before. Hard as this feels now, I know you can get through this. Yes, knowing this does change how I feel about you. I see you as even more beautiful and courageous. I respect you. I love you. Hey, listen. Research shows that talking about our feelings is often easier with friends than with family members. So if you are frustrated that your sibling or parent is not able to listen and talk with you about how you're feeling, you are not alone. It's completely normal for family members to fall down on the job in the feelings realm. It's also true that family members are more likely to pitch in with nitty-gritty help like cleaning or financial help, so if it feels right, and in some relationships it doesn't, ask them to roll up their sleeves and help, and process your innermost feelings with friends. Questions of etiquette. Is this the right time to talk? Where and when matters when it comes to talking. With that in mind, try not to ask someone how they're doing unless you're ready to hear a real answer. For example, don't ask the question as you're exiting the elevator when the person you're talking to isn't. Also not a good idea, asking when you're within earshot of people not connected to the conversation. As one newly divorced woman said, first of all, don't bring it up in front of a group of people. If you are really asking out of real concern, do it discreetly. If you want to connect, to find the right time, you can always ask, when is a good time to connect? Or just make an overture for lunch or coffee, or just send an email, note, or card. Don't think that you need to be available at the drop of a hat for any kind of emotionally intense conversation. Unless the person you're asking is in trauma mode or shock, you'll probably win points for thoughtfulness and discretion. Am I ready to hear a real answer? We all have different capacities for listening, and we all lead busy lives. The good news is that you don't have to be your neighbor's armchair therapist unless you really want to be. Only ask, how are you, if you really have the time and a serious inclination to know, and it's okay if you don't have the time or the inclination. No one wants to share their vulnerability with everyone in any case. And if, ultimately, you're not really that interested or you just don't know a person that well, stick with, I'm sorry. It still shows that you authentically care, and you won't be running the risk of implying more concern than is there. Is there an expiration date on reaching out? It's common to think that the moment to reach out and acknowledge someone's situation has passed us by. It is almost always okay to reach out a few weeks, months, or in some situations, years after the fact. If something truly bad has happened, a person's life has changed forever, and just because time has passed, they probably haven't stopped thinking about their grief, about the illness they went through, about their ex. What's more, many of their friends will stop thinking about it as time goes on. People often wind up feeling very alone with the long-term effects of what they went through. Being the person who remembers, even months or years later, isn't a bad thing to be. Loss doesn't have an expiration date. One man told us, after a month or so, no one ever spoke of my mother in any fashion, as though she completely disappeared. Not just that she died, but that she was erased. So whenever you find out something bad has happened to someone you know, feel free to write, say, or do something out of the blue to express your concern. Be an unexpected gift. If you've already reached out once and you care to do so again, that's great. It never gets old. And if you don't know how someone is feeling about their situation so long after the fact, just say, I don't know how you are doing now, but I heard the news and I'm sorry. Empathy tip. Saying, I wished I had reached out sooner is plenty. Spare the person on the receiving end all the reasons, excuses for why you didn't reach out. It doesn't mean the reasons are not valid, but it just doesn't matter that much, and it can make the overture seem more about you than you probably intend. Am I beating a dead horse? We may feel we've covered enough ground by asking someone just once about their difficult time, but if your relationship with the person in pain can bear it, it's good to ask again. It's almost always appreciated when we follow up and ask how someone is doing a few weeks or months after their initial time of difficulty. You can even ask, how are you doing with your situation now? Kelsey says, I never expected to feel so much sorrow over my miscarriage for so much time. 4 months after it happened, my good friend Amy, who I see on a regular basis, asked out of the blue how I was doing with it. I was still struggling with it, actually, and until hearing her question, I had felt ashamed for not being over it. Her interest made my grief 4 months later feel normal and important. The talking about it lasted no more than 15 seconds, but the impact of her well-timed concern remains to this day. A parent whose 3-year-old child was diagnosed with cancer said, now that we have finished treatment, there seems to be the feeling that it is all over, but we have to deal day to day with the worries of recurrent disease and the lifelong side effects of high-dose chemotherapy. I also felt that my son had missed out on half of his childhood. I want to talk about the trauma we went through and the aftermath, but no one is asking. Don't be afraid to ask about someone's condition more than once. Follow up. Empathy tip. The best way to figure out how much or how often to bring up someone's difficult time is by reading their cues. If you ask someone about their issue twice in a conversation and it's a non-starter, then that's your cue. Don't ask about it anymore right then. If the person broaches the subject on their own, then of course ask about it with a follow-up question or two. And if you don't know each other well, there's no need to ask about it more than once. Many people come to feel self-conscious if their difficult time becomes a perennial source of conversation. If you see someone fairly regularly, whether every day at the office, every few days with your exercise group, or every week for your Sabbath service, it's probably best to not check in about your friend's issue every time you see them. Is sending an email just tacky? No, email makes sending love a lot easier, and when something is easier, it is more likely to happen. Despite how embarrassing it can be to resort to the easy option when someone is having the worst possible time, it's so much better than doing nothing. Which means that email is a great option. Empathy tip. As one woman wrote about receiving emails after her father's death, after I sent a mass email to my network of friends, family, and coworkers announcing that my dad had passed, I got tons of messages back. A number of them were from people who cared, but who would not ordinarily take the time to send a card. While some might think it uncool to send a condolence message by email, I really appreciated hearing from folks regardless of how they reached out. Texting and social media do count. Who knew texting could be so powerful a tool for helping people feel better? Sorry, parents of teenagers everywhere. Texting isn't just for letting your friends know you're running late again or breaking up with someone in the sketchiest possible way. Texting is actually being studied as an effective way for psychologists to support people who are depressed. You may feel that writing 15 words or fewer on social media or text or sending an emoji of a glass of wine isn't the right way to connect with someone when they're in pain. But remember, it's not about finding the right words, but simply connecting. Sometimes we only need to know people are thinking about us and don't always need to talk about what we are feeling. So, if you are hovering over your computer or phone, wondering whether to email or post a condolence or just say hi, love you, or share something else, the answer is yes. A call is an additional bonus if you are a close friend, but virtual comfort really does count. Is calling even appropriate anymore? With all the other ways to communicate at our fingertips, people rarely get on the phone anymore. When the phone rings, it can feel intrusive, especially if it's a number we don't recognize. So do you call someone when they're in crisis? If you are not already very close friends, we recommend you don't pick up the phone. If you aren't close, definitely do not call within days of a tragic event or difficult news. A card or an email is better. However, if you are good friends or close family, call. The person can always choose to not pick up. One of the women Kelsey surveyed commented, "I would have liked more phone calls from a few close friends after I lost my husband. I don't expect them to know exactly what to say or really be able to help, but just a simple check-in, a phone call or message would have let me know they were thinking of me. That would have been really supportive and helpful." Empathy tip. Avoid expressions like, "I've left you a couple of messages." One of the worst things you can do is make someone feel pressure to call back. Much better to simply say, "No need to call back," and leave it at that. All that said, send a card. Given that so much of our modern communications are via electronics, getting an actual card, one made out of paper that comes in an envelope with a stamp on the outside and everything, feels these days even more like someone made a special effort. Unlike a text or a tweet, you can display a card as a reminder that someone was thinking of you. Many of us keep cards for years, if not for a lifetime, reading them with every move of our stuff. And even better, if you're struggling with what to say, cards can do a great job of helping you find the right words. If you can find the time to send a card, please do. Embrace the challenge of buying a stamp, remember those? And finding a person's physical address. Where there's a will, there's a way. Empathy tip. In an ideal world, you wouldn't ask a grieving person for their address. You can resort to asking for it if you must, it's not a huge deal. But first, try and find it some other way. Sometimes people need space. We've written a lot here about reaching out, so it goes against our very instincts to state it, but sometimes a person just wants to forget about their situation or feel normal again. In these times, if you don't think they are in a dangerous situation, you can respect a person's wish to be alone, or offer to go to a movie or have some other kind of night out. For those times when someone is too tired for entertainment or chatting, simple company is great. As one woman who was ill described, "I didn't want to talk, I was too tired, but my friend came by and hung out on the couch and read while I stayed in bed. It helped me feel less lonely." Okay, I'll tell you about my boring life. There's nothing like seeing your neighbor in mourning or friend bald from chemotherapy to make you feel a tad sheepish when complaining about your boss. There are certainly times to leave your own worries at the door and focus on your friend. What people in a difficult time often fear, however, is that their scary, awful situation means they are left out of other people's lives. Yes, not being able to find jeans that fit your waistline is a good problem to have, but it just might be your problem today. If your friend or neighbor or colleague isn't in crisis or emotionally distraught, then just be who you are and share your situation. Because people in grief want to feel like you see them as a whole person, not just a griever or a patient. One young man, Kevin, who lost both his parents in a plane crash, put it this way: "I felt best when people didn't treat me differently even after they learned of my loss. I returned home after spending a month at my parents' house, and some friends gave me a low-key dinner party when I returned. It helped me ease back into a life that I knew would never be the same." Bottom line, knowing when to listen and what to say starts with saying "I'm sorry," asking "How are you today?" Don't forget to listen to the answer. Focusing on and acknowledging the person's present feelings, not just the facts. Paying attention to cues. Is it a good time, or does the person need a little space? Don't be afraid to follow up if now isn't the right time. Expressing that the person is not alone. Expressing faith in the person's probably rattled judgment. Sharing the love. Using technology for good. Giving space when space is needed. And being yourself with your mundane problems. Chapter 5. Small gestures make a big difference. I loved her texts. Just knowing that she noticed and cared was all that I needed. It's not like she had a magic lever that would release balloons from the ceiling and make my disease go away. Ken, diagnosed with MS. One day, Boris was at the deli when he spotted Noboru. At least he was pretty sure his name was Noboru. They had been part of the same cycling crew back in the day, and Boris had always liked him. Boris was about to say hi when he remembered he'd heard Noboru's father had recently passed away. He was struck with doubt. Should I say something? What if he starts crying? Just by looking at him across the store, Boris could see that Noboru wasn't in great shape, but he didn't know what to do. Too embarrassed to say anything, Boris paid in cash so he could get out of there faster and not have to face him. But Boris didn't get away clean. For the rest of the day, he couldn't get Noboru's face out of his mind, so that night, he looked up his email and wrote him. I saw you at the store today, but was too chicken to say anything. I'm really sorry about your loss. I can't imagine what that is like. I'm really sorry. Boris pressed send before he could back out. The next morning, there was no reply from Noboru, so he wondered if his email was inappropriate. But that afternoon, Noboru responded. Hey, it has been horrible, worse than you can imagine. But your email really helped me out today, really. Thanks. Boris wasn't proud of running out of the deli, but he felt really glad he sent that note. And it was actually a lot easier to do than he thought. Sometimes what's holding us back from offering comfort isn't that we don't care enough, but that we don't feel we have the time or the bandwidth to do something that will make a difference. We may feel that we have to be 100% available all the time when we're around someone in a tough situation. It's not unreasonable to think that saying I'm sorry is an inadequate response to, say, the loss of a loved one. Or that asking, how are you, and genuinely wanting to know means we are then responsible for talking with this person about their situation until the end of time. The good news is these fears are normal. The better news is these fears are not rational. We'll explain exactly why with our third touchstone of showing up. Small gestures make a big difference. Tiny pebbles make wide ripples. In Kelsey's Empathy Bootcamp workshops, participants put together what they call a gesture wall, a convincing demonstration of the massive, comforting power of small gestures. To create the gesture wall, each person writes down one thing, a gesture, that a neighbor, friend, colleague, or someone they barely know did for them that made a big difference in their lives when times were dark. These are then posted on a wall and reviewed in total by all the workshop participants. The takeaway is always the same. The gestures themselves are often very small and require little effort, but the effect they have on the receivers is significant, sometimes even years later. Equally valuable about the exercise is what it reveals about the variety of people who matter in our lives. They include neighbors, colleagues, good friends, strangers, and family. The biggest revelation for viewers of the gesture wall is that for most situations, comforting someone is not a Herculean effort, because providing comfort is not the sole responsibility of any one person. And that's because caring takes a village. You are not a soul doctor. When someone is in a rough time, you are not being called upon to commit the next 20 years to helping them work through every problem they'll ever have. People who can drop everything and care for us are a wonderful gift, but that person doesn't have to be you. If you feel overwhelmed by life and are maxed for time or emotional bandwidth, but you also care, take this to heart. Offering comfort is not leading someone on or committing yourself to offering more comfort later. It can be a one-time offer. You can decide how much to give. It's perfectly okay if what you offer is simple or seemingly small. Empathy warm-up. Creating a gesture wall. It can be hard to believe that others will find your small gifts valuable, and the following exercise can help. Answer the following brief questions for yourself, and then maybe ask them of two friends. You can even do your own mini version of Empathy Bootcamp where you all write your answers to each question on sticky notes, and when you're done, stick them up on the wall and spend some time looking at the range of responses. 1. What's something a colleague did that meant a lot to me in a difficult time? 2. What's something an acquaintance did for me that comforted or helped me? 3. What's something an old friend I hadn't seen in forever did for me? 4. What did a good friend or family do that supported me? 5. What were some of the most amazing gifts I received in my difficult time? After considering the range of your own responses and/or those of your friends, check out the following examples of gestures collected from Kelsey's workshops. Some of these might just give you an idea of something you can do to help someone right now. While you look at these example responses collected from empathy boot camps, think back to the state of being a grieving, freaked-out person. Consider how these gestures, in their small, cumulative ways, help with the following: loneliness, shame, fear, overwhelm, uncertainty, and financial insecurity. From colleagues. My student sent me a huge basket of organic, healthy food. Offered to donate paid time off when I was close to running out. My boss let me work from home. Stopped by my desk to say hello. The office staff sent me flowers. When I woke up from surgery, my colleagues had decorated my hospital walls with healing words, quotes, and phrases that were meaningful to me. Made a giant card at work for people to write comments on. Someone I only know from work sent me a $150 food gift certificate while I was recovering, asking that I focus on nourishing myself. From neighbors and acquaintances. Left flowers and food outside our door when we got back from the hospital. Hearing from people who had lost somebody to suicide was incredibly powerful. An anonymous neighbor left a box of diapers on my steps with a note that simply said, "You got this." Our neighbors made us meals after our baby was born. Texted or called to check in. Our landlord delivered boxes of snacks and soft drinks when my husband was recuperating. Our neighbors handled alternate side-of-the-street parking of our car for a couple of weeks after my surgery so we wouldn't have to think about it. From friends. My friend researched grants and funding for adult cancer survivors and completed applications for me. Friends from church would visit our son in a coma so we could get a break. My friend sent me a link to a ridiculous YouTube video that I ended up watching whenever I needed a boost. We checked in and supported my partner when I was sick. It felt so comforting to know she was getting support, love, and tending when I couldn't do it. My friend gifted me an acupuncture session after a terrible breakup. Sent me a card every other week with silly stickers, thoughtful quotes, and overall nice messages of, "Hello, I'm thinking of you." I was emotionally devastated since my divorce. My friend just started casually cleaning the kitchen counter as I talked about my problems. I felt cared for in a gentle and unassuming way. From family. My sister came by and cleaned our house for us. She isn't a very emotional person, and this was a way for her to help. I really appreciated the effort. My aunt took me out for coffee every Tuesday to get me out of the house. My brother got our car cleaned and filled it with gas. My sister put her organizational skills to good use and organized our kitchen cabinets while my wife was undergoing chemo. Did my laundry. My cousin volunteered to be family communicator and sent out a weekly email to our family updating everyone on my condition. From strangers. When a stranger would approach me and warmly ask, "Are you okay?" I was on the ground, leaning against the glass of the airport terminal window, crying my eyes out. A stranger came up and asked if I was okay. I said yes, which wasn't true. I didn't want to talk to her about it. But I was really touched that she reached out. She made me feel better. Think about this. Fear-busting questions. 1. How many of the gestures you just read took a lot of time, energy, or money? 2. How many of them were dependent on having an impressive grasp of human psychology? 3. Is there any one thing someone did that cured somebody of pain? 4. Were the gestures by acquaintances, colleagues, or even friends intrusive? 5. Did the helpers need to know specific details of the situation in order to help? Empathy tip. Flowers are awesome, and as cliché as they may be, they really do wonders for brightening up someone's day. But overt gestures and gifts in public spaces, like the workplace, may prompt questions from coworkers, inadvertently making the network of people in the know wider than is desired. In which case, discreetly leave something else. Donuts, chocolate, HBO, Go password. Your empathy sweet spot. Once we've decided to support someone, our natural first question is usually, well, what do they need? This is a totally logical question when you're faced with fixing a faucet or a car. And someday Emily hopes to become a person capable of doing at least one of those things. But counterintuitively, thinking about what someone in a difficult time might need is a less helpful strategy when trying to support them. Instead, you can narrow down the parameters of care to something very manageable and even fun to do by asking yourself, what can I give? Your authentic gift starts with what you can give, not with what someone needs. If you care, doing something is important. But doing something you like to do and not something you would normally resist doing is invaluable. That's because doing something we naturally like to do means we're more likely to do it. Nobody sucks at empathy. Just like laughing, we were all born with the ability to show we care. You just might need a little help to figure out what you're good at. And while you're probably not good at everything, we know you're good at something, and you can use that something to be supportive. You can find the thing you love to give and know you can give well and offer up that very specific gesture. To give you a concrete idea of what we're talking about, give a listen to our empathy menu that was inspired by Kelsey's friend Megan, a young cancer survivor who describes in a personal essay the roles people played during her chemotherapy treatment, naming them an extension of my immune system. Before you review the menu, just remember, not every difficult time requires everything on this list. Furthermore, no one is good at everything on this list. If you are, we would like to meet you and be friends with you in case we require your support in the future. The empathy menu. The listener is good at asking questions, is attentive to the answers, and offers up space for the person to just be quiet with someone if talking feels like too much. The opposable thumbed sends texts just saying hi and I'm thinking of you. The spiritual prays and sends positive healing intentions. The poet sends a card, notes to say hello, I'm thinking of you, I'm sorry, I'm proud, or you are awesome, or something else even more poetic. The practical gift giver gives coupons for a cleaning service, food, massages. The chef drops off fresh and or frozen meals. The whimsical/funny gift giver gives silly gifts like a voodoo doll or a bright pink wig, maybe takes the person to a stand-up show. The perseverer forgives broken plans and keeps on scheduling. This is actually a characteristic everyone should aspire to when helping. The chauffeur drives and keeps company on important dates. The crafter makes something unique and meaningful, a quilt, a song, an awesome playlist. The networker finds out people who can help and makes an introduction from medical and alternative doctors to lawyers to therapists to someone else who's been in a similar situation. The entertainer invites the person out to movies, drinks, or accompanies them in a marathon of watching the dumbest reality television they can find. The researcher digs into the latest research, possibly shielding the patient from falling into the vast and terrifying abyss of medical information on the internet. The gardener does the yard work, brings plants. The workhorse runs errands from food shopping to picking up dry cleaning to housework. The organizer creates binders of important financial, health, and legal information. The babysitter/extended caregiver spends time with the kids or the frail people in our lives. The project manager coordinates other people's help. Nobody wants 8 casseroles on the same day. The financier helps out with costs on babysitting, medical or legal bills, and so on, and doesn't need to be paid back. The public relations guru, the point of contact for sharing updates with friends. The host or hostess invites the person to stay at their house or invites them over for meals. If you'd rather lick a live wire than talk about something emotionally difficult, but you really do care, there's huge relief in the empathy menu for you. It's good to know you can leave flowers at the door and run, or pen a condolence card, or sweep up your bereaved neighbor's yard without having to talk about his wife's passing in a way that makes you feel awkward. By helping or reaching out in some small way, you've acknowledged what someone is going through, and it will really make a difference in their day. And if that's all you feel you're capable of, that's fine. And the more fine you feel in giving what you can give, the more likely you will be to give it more often, and who knows, when you do have time or bandwidth, even give more. But the point is to give what you can and feel good about giving. So if you hate having emotional conversations but really love to garden, then offer up that skill to someone who needs it, even doing it while they aren't home if that's what makes you more comfortable. If, on the other hand, you can't be counted on to do chores for anyone else because you can't even count on getting them done for yourself, but you're a great listener, then trust that just by asking someone how they are doing when you really have the inclination and time to know is really valuable. Empathy workout. What are your empathy superpowers? Choose 2 things you are good at and 2 you know you can cross off the list right away. For example, Kelsey says, I enjoy buying flowers and even hosting people for a long spell, which is something a lot of people won't offer to do, so I offer it up fairly regularly. But cleaning? Cooking? Not my strong suit. I used to feel obligated to cook for people because it seemed like that's what I was supposed to do, but the stress of it made it hard for me to give with love and actually made me a bit of a fretter. Refer back to Chapter 3. Emily says, I really like making things, and given infinite time, I'd love to be embroidering pillows or doing something crafty. But honestly, at this point in my life, it makes more sense for me to send gifts like massages, food delivery service gift certificates, or there's always a card. Just so you know, I am totally on board for driving you to treatment, cleaning your place, helping pick out flattering wigs, coming up with badass visualization exercises. And if you twist my arm, I guess I'd also be cool with lying on the couch and watching trashy TV together. I know, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I love you. When we recognize the comforting value of our unique talents, and even better, accept the limits we have on what we can do, the more likely we are to offer our few but valued gifts. This is way preferable to having a gesture dragged out of us by a person in crisis. Listen to this sample conversation scenario to see what we mean. Seeing it in action. Chen. I'm a mess. I just can't get out of bed. Megan. I'm so sorry, Chen. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Chen. Thanks. No, I'm okay. So Megan cares and wants to help, but Chen doesn't really know where to begin with asking for help, so he says he's okay, but he's not really okay. And because he's not okay, he doesn't feel comfortable telling Megan what he needs, even if he knows what it is. Let's try this again. Chen. I'm a mess. I just can't get out of bed. Megan. I'm so sorry, Chen. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Chen. Thanks, Megan. I have to go to the funeral on Tuesday. Can you come feed my cat? Megan. Oh, sorry, I can't. I'm allergic. Chen. How about moving my car when I'm gone? Megan. Oh, gosh, I don't know how to drive. Anything else? Chen. No, thanks. I'm all set. In that second scenario, Chen was brave to ask, and he took Megan at her word. And, of course, Megan wanted to be helpful, but there was no way for Chen to know what kind of help she really had in mind. Any rational person would do what Chen did and eventually give up. The easiest way for Megan to truly be helpful would be to offer her specific, authentic gift with love and confidence. This could be any of the following. Megan, I'm a great gardener and would love to come by and water your plants while you're away. I can also take in the mail. Or, I can't drive, or I'm allergic to cats, but I'll find you someone who can and coordinate it for you. When's your flight? I'll make sure someone will be there to pick you up. Or if Megan can't or doesn't want to do any chores, she can just say, I'm sorry. If she's a listener, she can offer to listen and say, want to tell me what's going on? And if she's a gift giver, she can leave something to be waiting for Chen when he gets back. In any of the above scenarios, Megan offers what she can and wants to handle and doesn't offer what she can't or doesn't want to do. This will be easier for Megan and feels much better to Chen. If you aren't in a position to offer anything specific to fill a need but still want to do something like send a gift, a card, or a poem, go ahead. Again, listen to the empathy menu. It's likely if you were to email someone asking what they need, they wouldn't have said, a really good playlist for my chemo session. But you are a lover of music and want to create a playlist, then just do it, and don't wait for someone to ask for it. But wait, you say you have no time to make an entire playlist? Okay, just post your favorite inspirational song on the person's Facebook page. You see where we're going here, right? Your authentic gift, whether it's being asked of you or not, is still really awesome to receive. When your offer isn't accepted. A lot of times we do offer to help, and it isn't accepted. This may be because, 1, the offer isn't specific enough, 2, the need isn't there at that time but could very well be at some point in the future, or 3, the need was never really there, nor will it ever be. To solve the first problem, you can just make your offer more specific. For example, on Thursdays I'm free and can do any kind of errands you might need for 2 hours. I have a second car I never use. If you need one for out-of-town guests, I'd be happy to loan it. If a person doesn't accept your offer the first time you make it, you can reoffer a few more times, but no more than that, over several days or weeks or months, and see what happens. Hey, listen, your offer may not be needed right now, and that's just fine. Kelsey says, when I went through my breast cancer treatment, one offer for help with childcare for 2-year-old Georgia, it came 3 times over 3 months. Each and every time, my husband Mike and I declined because we hadn't hung out with that family in over a year, and Georgia didn't enjoy being with families she didn't know well. But that we didn't need that childcare didn't matter. The mere offer, repeated as it was, gave us a tremendous sense of feeling cared for. The thought really counted because it was an offer of tangible relief. It may also be the case that you made your gesture and never heard about how it was received. And you know what? Not getting a thank you note in these situations is completely normal. If you need convincing, consider this. Kelsey's organization, Help Each Other Out, put together public art exhibits on being there in San Francisco and New York that featured portraits of people in a difficult time, along with their stories of a gesture that helped get them through it. The portraits and stories were displayed in neighborhood corridors and store windows that stretched over many blocks. So clearly these gestures were meaningful. However, more times than not, the people who had done these gestures had never been thanked by the people who were so clearly comforted by them. Because when you are in grief or freaked out and scared, you often don't write thank you notes. Empathy tip. The sick, grieving, or freaked out person always gets a pass. Always offer up your gift with a no need to write a thank you, and mean it. Offer your gift with joy, for real. A major common fear held by those in crisis is that they're becoming a burden. Relieving them of this fear is simple. Do everyone a favor and offer your support with joy. How? Try the following things. Practice a moment of gratitude that you have this opportunity to be of service to someone in your life. Make no mention of any sacrifices, like change in schedule or financial cost, you might have made for this supportive gesture to happen. Try to offer what you can before the person even asks for it in a matter-of-fact, happy-to-do-it kind of way. If they ask for your help, respond with saying how it would actually be a pleasure for you to do it, because remember, a person in need fears being a burden. For example, not at all, it's no problem. Doing somebody else's housework is a good excuse to get me away from the kids. I'm going to the store anyway, so what can I get you? Walking the dog will get me outside. I've been dying to hang out with your daughter, Susie. Oh, great, I finally get to try out that new lasagna recipe. If something is being asked of you that you can't do, come up with something else on the empathy menu that you can do instead. Maybe the person won't need it, but at least they know you are serious about trying to help and may enlist your service in the future. Empathy tip. We all have moments when we can't follow through or even forget a commitment we made. It happens. But when someone is in their time of difficulty, they are feeling extra sensitive and are depending on you. In these times, when you don't follow through, it hurts. So, do what you can to make your offer happen and give plenty of notice when you can't. When discretion is a factor. People might want some kinds of news handled with more discretion than others. Given that we live in an age of social media shares and our culture is more open than ever about a range of life's hard times, it can be difficult to imagine that someone might not want many people to know what's going on. For some people, and likely with some issues more than others, there are concerns around 1, privacy, 2, fear, and 3, plain old healthy denial. All these factors mean that discretion should always be a consideration. Privacy. Some issues feel more private to people than others. Infertility. The numerous ups and downs and uncertainties, the private nature of the endeavor, and the judgmental responses this issue often elicits can mean that this experience is not one shared among a wide circle. For people with a really interested, emotionally aware, and inquisitive group of friends, it's possible they may feel others are asking too much about their experience. For others who never get asked, infertility is incredibly isolating. In general, unless you are very close, don't expect to ask about it, unless she brings it up with you first. If you are close, ask occasionally, not every time you see her, and be really open to cues about whether to press for more information. One question to avoid: are you pregnant? Because when she wants you to know, you'll know. Miscarriage. This very painful loss can often be kept private out of choice when it is too hard to mention the grief out loud, or because of stigma when women fear judgment about why the miscarriage happened. People can also remain silent about their miscarriage to keep baby-making plans quiet from bosses and colleagues, or from parents who are craving that first grandchild, or anxious friends who want to start buying up little baby hats. If she told you she was pregnant, you can and should reach out. But otherwise, it's not critical to do so. Loss of a job. There is reputational damage to being fired, and often some significant shame in the perceived rejection. Casually reaching out with news, "I heard you were fired," can cause panic about gossip. However, if you want to reach out because you want to tell someone they did a great job, they really need to hear that. Just do so with tact. "I heard you aren't working for blank anymore. I just wanted to say how much I admired the work you did there." Illness. People may keep their illness private so they don't have to deal with other people's reactions, which often involve an unwanted opinion or an emotional response that the sick person feels obligated to manage. If the illness is somewhat chronic, people's feelings can change about how much to disclose. Sometimes they may feel like sharing more than other times. At work, news of an illness might jeopardize a job or chances at a promotion. For some, keeping the news of their illness quiet in the workplace and other social settings helps them feel normal, without the disease taking over their identity. Look for cues about how someone says they want to handle their situation. Often you will notice if they feel fairly public about it, or they'll give some indication that they'd rather keep things quiet. Divorce. Divorce not only impacts a couple, but that couple's circle of family and friends, meaning the news of a split often unleashes a wave of opinions and theories from anyone who's ever met the involved parties. It's not uncommon for those exiting their marriage to want a good handle on their situation before sharing it with others. What's more, some kinds of workplaces and religious groups may frown upon divorce, creating fear about being a source of speculation and gossip until the person feels ready to manage it. If someone is deliberating over decisions and you want to be a close confidant, just listen and work very hard to not weigh in. If you aren't close, but you have a long-standing relationship and the news of the divorce has been made public, you can reach out to express your overall admiration for a person in what might be a hard time. However, make sure you don't sound like you're fishing for gossip by asking why it happened, and be open to hearing how a person is doing with their situation. Loss. Of all these issues, death can be the most public. What may be a more private matter is the exact nature of someone's grief, namely that not all loss comes with pain, that it sometimes comes with relief or a whole bunch of ambivalent feelings. In general, reaching out to the griever in some way, if you care, is generally appreciated. You may presume there is sorrow attached to their loss, but don't dwell on it unless sorrow is pronounced. Provide room for the griever to talk openly about how they feel. And if you are not close, a simple "I'm sorry" will do. In general, reaching out to the griever in some way, if you care, is usually appreciated. Fear and overwhelm. Finding out that your child has a disability, hearing the news of your own terrible diagnosis, unexpectedly discovering that your partner is filing for divorce. All these situations can cause shock, fear, and a sense of being completely overwhelmed. And these feelings are another reason people might want their situation handled discreetly. Just saying out loud that the scary situation is happening can make it more real than someone wants it to be. We decided not to share the news beyond my husband's immediate family and best friend. A few months later, he shared his illness more broadly, and there were some who expressed dismay that they weren't told sooner. What they didn't seem to understand was how hard, scary, and very personal it was for the person with a life-threatening illness to have to tell others what was going on. Valerie, whose husband had cancer. It is not uncommon in these situations for a person to appoint a communications guru, refer back to the empathy menu, who can communicate the details of a particular situation and serve as a kind of project manager, fielding questions and offers of assistance. So if you're a communications-friendly person, feel free to volunteer that service. Hey, listen. When people share their vulnerability with us, it's a sign of trust and friendship. So it's natural that when a friend presents their difficult news after figuring it out without you, that you want to ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" But in some situations, it's just too hard or scary for the person in a difficult time to talk about it. Instead of focusing on what that person didn't do, focus on how you can be of support now. If your friend has a general pattern of holding back vulnerability and it's hard for you, you can address it at some later time, just not around the time of crisis. Healthy denial. You can't always know ahead of time how someone wants news of their difficult time handled. Not everyone chooses to deal with their issue by sharing, talking, or processing it. This may not be your chosen method, but some people find engaging around a devastating issue simply too distracting from their career, their family, their lives. Author Jackie Collins, who battled stage 4 cancer while still publishing books, said, "I didn't want sympathy. Sympathy can weaken you." You may not agree with this choice, but in most cases, it's not your job to change that. How to navigate between respecting someone's privacy and simply not showing up? There is no rule, other than the rule of thumb we've both chosen to live by. If you have to choose between offering too much or too little care, we would choose too much. That said, pay attention to cues and consider the following. Respect it when someone doesn't want to talk about what's going on. Ask people in the person's inner circle if they have an inkling of how someone wants the news handled. Pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues if you can. Be aware of how you would want the news handled yourself. If you believe privacy is a core concern, yet you feel strongly about reaching out, do so discreetly. And finally, learn to live with your empathy mistakes. If you overstep your concern in one person's case, you have not failed at empathy. You are still great at empathy. It just wasn't what that person wanted right then. It happens to everyone. But in most cases, your efforts at outreach will be appreciated, so take the risk unless someone explicitly tells you otherwise. When should I reach out? The best time to reach out depends on your relationship to a person and the nature of the hard time. There is no hard and fast rule, but the following are some general guidelines. If you are very close to the person. If the person reached out to you, make contact immediately by phone and then in person if possible. If you've heard the news through someone else, it's best to contact the person by text or email in the first few days. Follow up with a call and leave a voicemail. Make sure to visit the person within the week and within a few days if possible. When visiting isn't possible, be a regular presence with texting and phone calls. Just be sure to stress that there's no need to call or text back. If you are an acquaintance with, say, regular interaction at work or in your social life, you can wait a week or two to send an email, a card, or flowers. Don't make immediate contact as it can overwhelm the person. It's probably best not to call, even if you have been in a similar situation. People often feel overwhelmed by too many phone calls. If you have limited social interaction, for example, you don't know someone's last name, but you see them a lot in the neighborhood, at social events, or in the workplace, and you have a mutual regard, you can wait to acknowledge the issue in person or with a card when you see them next, which may even be several weeks or more. But first, consider the level of discretion that certain experiences might require. You don't have to say anything. A special note to bosses. According to research, and also anyone you'd ever ask, high-quality connections and compassion in the workplace help employees readjust after significant loss or illness. When bosses don't acknowledge employees' difficult times, it doesn't make the employees more productive. They'll probably be quite the opposite. Instead of pretending everything is normal, simply acknowledge what has happened. The moment you hear of an employee's difficulty, find a private moment to say, "I'm sorry." Bosses should also strongly consider sending flowers and/or a card, should follow up with the employee to find out if any special accommodations are needed, and should expect to be flexible as time goes on. Going the extra mile to work with HR and a willingness to get creative around time off is crucial too. What we've heard time and time again is that the return in employee loyalty is well worth it. My boss was very flexible about my work schedule and let me work at home for a few months. I was probably a pretty poor worker at that time, but it paid off in the long run. I stayed with the organization for a long time and really gave a lot later. Alvin, whose daughter was born with a heart condition. Also, make sure to ask your employee how the situation is going every once in a while. As a young man with multiple sclerosis told us, I don't want to focus on my illness in the workplace, but I appreciate that my boss checks in to make sure that I'm okay. The bottom line, adequate is awesome. If what you can or want to give is nothing more than a simple "I'm sorry," that's better than turning away. If the thing you most love to give isn't needed right now, your offer, even if it's not accepted, is better than turning away. And if what you want to give is the moon and stars because you have that much time, inclination, or sense of responsibility, not to mention resources and a rocket ship, that's better than turning away too. If we imagine that helping equals rescuing someone from their pain, we're more likely to shy away from the effort. We could easily feel unprepared to handle such a large responsibility or erroneously conclude it's not our place to do so in the first place. Even when we're feeling confident in our ability to shoulder a ton of things for other people, it takes only one long day at work, one awful night with the kids, or one awesome invitation to get away for the weekend for us to decide we need to relegate that big job of empathy for another day. If you are struggling with feeling like what you're giving is inadequate, know this. You are probably doing great. Doing anything, even small things, is totally adequate. And adequate is awesome. Part 3. Just help me not be a disaster. Chapter 6. Please never say this. Thanks. My uncle fancied himself a spiritual mentor and said, I see this as a sign of unresolved issues between you and your mother. Fuck you. Heather, a cancer survivor. Kelsey says, Carla is a good friend of mine and a very optimistic person. When she started losing her vision, the doctors couldn't figure out why. Naturally enough, she was having a hard time getting through all the medical tests, and the results had started pointing in one terrifying direction. Carla called me the day she learned the news. She had multiple sclerosis. This was worse than I had been expecting, but Carla, ever the optimist, said she was actually feeling pretty relieved to know and pretty hopeful overall. She said that the doctors told her it can take a long time for the symptoms to progress, and that so long as she didn't turn completely blind, she was, for the time being, feeling sort of okay about it. I paused for a few seconds, not wanting to feed my friend a load of optimistic horseshit. I also wanted her to know that I could handle the news, no matter how bad it got, and that I didn't need it to be sugar-coated. But how could I validate the gravity of Carla's situation while showing her that I was a good friend and could handle really bad news? I told Carla the story of a college friend who had MS. Her condition got so bad that she ended her life by starving herself to death. P.S. Thanks to Carla's gracious understanding and forgiveness, our friendship remains incredibly close, and I went on to learn a bunch of better ways to support a friend. In his memoir, A Grief Observed, C.S. Lewis writes about the loss of his wife to cancer. I see people, as they approach me, trying to make up their minds whether they'll say something about it or not. I hate if they do, and if they don't. We are mercurial creatures in times of loss and transition. So the reality is there is no silver bullet when it comes to being there for someone in her darkest hour. It's important, however, to not make things worse. You know that feeling when you're driving along, having a normal day, and suddenly you remember that stupid thing you said, and the mortification you feel makes you want to hurl yourself from the moving car? Oh my God, why did I say that? Seriously, what the fuck is wrong with me? Must think about literally anything else. Gah! Our goal is to prevent that feeling from ever happening. Our defenses can be offensive. A lot of our screw-ups in our attempts to be comforting are the result of subliminal impulses that psychologists and most laypeople refer to as defense mechanisms. These are the ways that our mind protects us from psychological pain. Often they are helpful features of our psyche, but sometimes our efforts to shield us from pain can get in the way of our being supportive. We'll describe a few of these defenses, and then you can see how they play out in some common "yikes, don't say this" scenarios. Denial. This is when we don't accept reality or the facts because they're too painful. We simply pretend that the bad thing is not happening. Projection. This is when we attribute our own thoughts and feelings to someone else who does not have those thoughts and feelings. Displacement. This is when a person's new trauma brings up our old trauma from the past. It can even make us get more emotional now than when we first experienced the hardship. One example would be getting really angry at your friend's recent ex because you never got to express that anger at your own ex. Intellectualization. When we want to avoid feeling emotional pain, our intellect can take over. Instead of feeling for someone, we analyze them or their situation. When you listen to a lot of the "don't say this" examples in this chapter, you can rest assured that these impulses are completely natural. And yet, as natural as they may be, they should be restrained. Me. P.S. Me? You know how it goes. You're telling a story about an incredibly hard thing in your life, like the time you had back surgery and couldn't walk for days. Your friend leans forward, and you think he's going to say something supportive. Instead, he says, "Oh my God, I know. That's exactly like when I sprained my thumb in the dressing room at Saks. I couldn't even text for a week, and the pain." Or you could be describing the heartbreak of yet another failed infertility treatment, and your friend pipes up with, "You guys should just go on a vacation and relax. Worked great for me." At the heart of many mistakes we make when trying to support someone is what we call all about me syndrome. According to our research and our own personal experience, AAMS happens a lot. It makes sense, and we've all done it. Grasping for the right words, we try to relate or pontificate or do something to help us connect to the issue. If there's anything we feel comfortable talking about, it's our own lives, so when we're faced with someone else's unknown, uncomfortable scenario, it's natural to want to bring the conversation back to the familiar territory of our own personal experience. Comparisons are always annoying. When we're trying to relate to someone in their difficult time, our most common instinct is to compare it to our own situation. Like we described in Chapter 4, when doing so, it may seem altruistic to help someone not feel alone. But in fact, comments such as, "I know how you feel," or "That's so much like what happened to me," can close off opportunities to learn what the person in crisis is feeling. As one divorced person said, "My mother believed that my divorce would be just like hers. She didn't want to or couldn't see that my divorce was different, that I am different." As someone who lost both parents said, "In general, I'm surprised by how folks are quick to start telling their own story but not really care about yours." That doesn't mean you can't say that something similar happened to you, but if you do, be very mindful to say little more than that and keep the conversation focused on the other person. Seeing it in action. Teresa learns that her colleague, Richard, just lost his mother. Teresa, "I'm sorry about your mother." Richard, "Thank you. She struggled with cancer for 2 years. It finally got the best of her." Teresa, "My father died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. We didn't even have a chance to say goodbye." Richard, "Wow, Teresa, I'm sorry to hear that." Teresa, "You must feel relieved you could at least be there when she died." In response to Teresa's comments about feeling relieved, Richard has a few unappealing options if he wants to continue the conversation. 1, "Yeah, I guess I am relieved." 2, "Not really relieved, no. It was terrible to watch her waste away in so much pain." 3, "Perhaps I should feel grateful I was with her at the end." Breakdown. Teresa's conversational tactics include 2 common pitfalls. First, by comparing her experience to Richard's, she changes the point of the conversation, which was empathy for Richard, to empathy for her, thus obligating Richard to address her feelings. Second, she is assuming, based on her own experience of disappointment at not being present when her father died, that Richard should experience relief at being present when his mother died. Richard's first response is to agree he is relieved, but with ambivalence, and so he doesn't get to authentically express how he feels. Richard's second response is very authentic, but defensive, meaning the conversation no longer feels supportive. Richard's third response suggests he is avoiding Teresa's judgment and unconvincingly acquiesces to feeling grateful. But mostly he's probably just feeling annoyed by Teresa. Let's try this again. Teresa, "I hear you just lost your mother." Richard, "Thank you. She struggled with cancer for 2 years. It finally got the best of her." To offer better support, Teresa has a few alternative responses. 1, "I'm so sorry." Here, she ignores her own experience. 2, "I'm sorry to hear that. I lost my father a few years ago. How are you doing?" Here, she acknowledges going through something similar, but keeps the focus on Richard's feelings. 3, "How was it seeing her go at the end of her life?" Here, if Teresa wants to avail herself to hear more about Richard's experience at the end of his mother's life, she can ask about it. In so doing, she uses her own experience to infer its importance, but not to assume Richard's feelings. This one's important, so let's see another example. Seeing it in action. Take a look at a conversation that happened with one of our interviewees, Kelly, when she told her friend Jen over the phone about her recent diagnosis of cancer. Kelly, "I have breast cancer." Jen, "Wow, well, at least they know a lot about your kind, because I have cancer too, and they don't know anything about my kind of cancer." Kelly, "Yeah, I guess it's good. Right. Except this kind of breast cancer is unique. Only 15% of breast cancers are triple negative, and they don't have a lot of research on how to treat it, other than with intense chemotherapy." Jen, "Well, I have to take a chemo pill every day to handle my cancer, and the effects are awful." Kelly, "Well, my cancer is so aggressive they're giving me the maximum dose, which will be awful for like 6 months. Is your chemo pill the maximum dose?" Jen, "No, but it still makes me tired, and I will have to take it for life. Yours will be over in 6 months." Kelly, approaching tears, "Right, but at least by taking your chemo pill you'll survive, right?" "I don't know that." Jen, "You'll probably survive." Kelly, click. Now, this is an extreme case of AAMS. However, it really did happen. And we can see how it could. Kelly's friend was stressed about her own situation, rightly so. However, maybe Jen wasn't quite ready to speak to Kelly yet about her cancer diagnosis because it was bringing up feelings about her own health. She couldn't get out of her own problems long enough to be supportive in that conversation. This phenomenon is something that support groups are well aware of, and it's why a common ground rule is about no one person's situation being any worse or better than another's. If you show up at a support group because you're scared or feeling alone, then it doesn't matter if you're stage 1 or stage 3, because what matters is that you feel, well, scared and alone. As one woman we interviewed said on people with healthy children who compare them to her child who has special health needs, no matter the intention, comparisons just don't help. End of story. I wish I could take away your pain, or at least take away the people who compare it to the time their hamster died. You're not an expert. As it turns out, if you've got the internet, you can be an expert and create a theory on anything. Wine causes cancer. Miscarriages can be a result of too much coffee or not enough coffee. Getting a divorce? There was an article just this past Sunday about how everyone else is too. That's right, your marriage crumbling is just a generational thing. You're not special. We'll send you the link. When it comes to being supportive, being smart matters way less than being kind and well-mannered. It's fine if you have a theory about why your uncle has lung cancer, but he doesn't need to hear your opinions now. As one woman explained to Kelsey regarding her mother's oral cancer diagnosis, it was annoying that everyone asked if she was a smoker. Yes, she had smoked when she was younger in the 1970s, but does that mean she deserved to get cancer? The question implied she asked for it, and it felt totally unsympathetic. Unless you actually are an expert whose expertise is being asked for, hearing news of someone's crisis is not the time to offer up casual theories about their misfortune. Doing this leads to two hurtful implications. One, the event was preventable and or deserved because if this person had only done X or Y instead, they would be fine. And two, your fact-finding mission is less about providing comfort than about weeding out the source of a problem to make sure it doesn't happen to you. A woman Kelsey interviewed was diagnosed with cancer and said about people asking her questions, "It feels like people are trying to use my situation to calculate their own risks." "Did you breastfeed? No?" "Phew, because I did, so I won't get cancer." "How often did you two have sex? Not much?" "Phew, so my own marriage is probably safe." When you want to reach out to a person going through something that you've also experienced yourself, you can now see why it's a good idea to restrain your normal but incredibly unhelpful impulse to compare your situations. If you don't feel prepared to handle someone else's difficulty because of the intense feelings it brings up about your own, refer back to the empathy menu in Chapter 5 and explore other ways of being there for your friend that don't involve much talking about it. And if you want to talk about the feelings that are coming up for you as a result of a friend's difficult time, talk to others about what's going on, not your suffering friend. Please stop with the worst-case scenarios. You're having a kid? I hope you're sleeping now because you know you won't sleep for years once the baby comes. Seriously, years. Whether it's a comment on how much sleep deprivation a new parent should expect or a listing of the statistics surrounding death rates and lung cancer, people do not feel comforted by worst-case scenarios. Even if they're a pessimist, hearing someone else echo their worst fears is pretty much the opposite of comforting. Kelsey was surprised by her reaction to worst-case scenario stories, as she's generally someone most likely to see the glass half empty with a microbe of some infectious disease in the water. But when people would commonly mention a relative or friend who died of breast cancer, she found herself nearly heading to the toilet to throw up because she was so freaked out. It's safe to assume that they've Googled their own situation a lot more than someone who isn't living it every day. What's more, by offering up a worst-case scenario, you're not sharing any information with the suffering person that they probably don't already know. Someone who is about to be a new parent already knows their sleep is about to be permanently disruptive. Got it. Thanks. And a person with lung cancer is probably all too aware of their own mortality. We get that your friend doesn't want to hear a bunch of optimistic BS, but your friend doesn't want to hear this incredibly depressing and scary version of the future either. Who would? As much as this rule requires considerable restraint for some, it's best to remember worst-case scenarios make people feel even more afraid than they already did. When life gives you lemons, I won't tell you a story about my cousin's friend who died of lemons. Seeing it in action. Juan learns that his sister, Sue, is getting divorced. Sue. Juan, I have some hard news to share. Carlos and I are getting divorced. Juan. What? Oh, wow. That's insane. How did this happen? Sue. Well, it's been coming for a while. Juan. But you always seem so happy. Sue, there's a lot to it. Juan, but what about the house and kids? How the hell are you going to get by? Sue, this kind of thing happens to people all the time. The kids won't even notice it happen. In fact, I am great. Sue then hangs up and sobs, doubts her entire existence, and wants to punch Juan. Breakdown. Juan's panicked reaction to Sue's news is rooted in concern, but his astonishment makes Sue feel judged, and his line of questioning makes her feel like he has zero faith in her ability to cope. Juan's doomsday panic makes Sue want to, 1, avoid his judgment, and 2, reassure him. She does this by normalizing what she is going through. It happens all the time, and it happens to lots of people. Sue ends up having to both defend herself and comfort Juan, which is the opposite of how Juan probably intended for this to go down. Why did Juan do this? It may be he is truly concerned about Sue, knowing, for example, that she and her husband just took on a major loan to buy their house. Or he is bringing his own fears into the situation because he has contemplated these things against getting a divorce himself. One woman Kelsey spoke to described her father's concern about her getting divorced. He asked that she try harder to save her marriage, but 6 months after she filed her divorce papers, her parents filed theirs. The point is, our own fears can come up when someone describes their difficult situation. Our job is to not act on those fears with a line of questioning or giving advice, but simply to find out how the person is doing. Let's try this again. Sue. Juan, I have some hard news. Carlos and I are getting divorced. Juan. Wow, that is surprising. How are you doing? Here, Juan suggests surprise without panic. He doesn't ask what happened, assuming he will learn in time. He also shows interest in Sue's feelings by immediately turning the conversation back to how she is doing. Here's another option for Juan. Juan, there are lots of things you must be thinking about right now. How are you doing? Here, Juan is showing his concern by validating the hurdles that lie ahead of Sue without suggesting she is ignorant of them, and he makes it clear that he's available to talk more about her feelings. But wait, unbridled optimism might be worse. There's always someone who will say things like, when one door closes, another one opens. Everything happens for a reason. It's God's plan. There's a deeper meaning behind all this. Does this person mean well? Probably. Is this person incredibly effing annoying? Probably. It can be hard for the optimistically inclined among us to hear, but optimistic reactions, ones that people who are grieving might consider irrationally optimistic, can be even tougher to bear than pessimistic reactions. For people in crisis, ill-timed optimism just feels like a meaningless, empty platitude, especially for a situation that really might not get better. Research backs this up. Unbridled positivity in an experience of failure or distress makes people feel worse, not better. What ours and the experience of many others also confirms is that putting a positive spin on something difficult usually winds up feeling like an effort to get the griever to stop talking about it, making the grievers shut down and stop calling you. You may very well believe that everything happens for a reason or that God has a plan. Many people do. But these are your beliefs, and unless you know that the suffering person shares them, they likely won't serve as comfort the way they might for you. Eventually, with time and perspective, the person in crisis may be able to look back on this time in their lives and think, you know what? I can see how X good thing came out of that terrible event. Making meaning out of horrible situations does help people cope with them, but that kind of benefit is something we arrive at, or not, on our own, in our own time. No amount of force-fed positivity will help unless the suffering person is ready to go there, and in the immediate aftermath of a diagnosis, death, or loss, very few people are. Your job is to hear, not reduce, someone's worry. An incomplete collection of unhelpful statements. Everything happens for a reason. This is God's plan. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It could be worse. At least it's not cancer. Just think positive thoughts. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. At least you have one healthy child. You can always just adopt. Really, anything beginning with just or at least. Empathy tip. If fix-it platitudes are so unhelpful, why are they so common? Val Walker, in her book The Art of Comforting, argues that our culture values production over presence and organization over emotional mess. We believe in getting things done rather than just letting things be, and we believe that healing means getting over rather than learning to live with the loss. Our discomfort with suffering and our rush to make it stop can result in simple-minded fixes that suggest the problem of grief is an easy one to get over. This superficial effort just makes the suffering person feel even more broken and pathetic for suffering at all, and more detached from the person trying to help. For all these reasons, it's best to avoid look-on-the-bright-side phrases and platitudes. Instead, find out how your friend is feeling about what's going on. It's simple. Just listen. Please let me be the first to punch the next person who tells you everything happens for a reason. I'm sorry you're going through this. Seeing it in action. Here, Marty is telling her neighbor, Wendy, about her child's diagnosis. Marty: I can't sleep. I'm a wreck. She is getting a psychological workup. The doctors say based on her history and what they've seen so far, it's more than 50% likely that she has Tourette's syndrome. Wendy: Don't worry, they didn't say 100% chance. Instead of hearing Marty's worry, in this dialogue, Wendy tries to reduce it with a positive view of the odds. Marty: I don't know. More than a 50% chance isn't a 1% chance. There's a 50% chance I'll have a cheeseburger tonight, meaning I really might. So my kid really might have a disorder, you know? Wendy: Everything will be okay. You have to stay positive. Here, Wendy inserts her own belief system about what causes good health outcomes. By doing this, she implies, 1, Marty's belief system is inadequate and is the cause of her suffering. 2, Marty's failure to stay positive enough may even be the root cause of her child's condition, and this failing somehow means Marty willed it to happen or the family deserved it. Let's try this again. Marty: I can't sleep. I'm a wreck. The doctors say based on what they've seen so far, it's more than 50% likely she has Tourette's. Wendy: I am so sorry this is happening. Marty: Thank you. I don't know what to do. I guess all I can do is wait and see and stay off the internet, but it's so hard. Wendy's simple acknowledgement of this difficult news opens up a lot of trust for Marty to then talk more about how she's feeling. Empathy tip: follow their lead. If you ask the person in crisis how they're feeling and they respond with unbridled optimism or a phrase that you would consider to be a platitude, it's okay to follow their lead and mirror their language. Your positive perspective, in this case, would likely be helpful. Resist armchair quarterbacking. It's hard to resist sharing the 20/20 hindsight that comes to us so clearly in the time of someone else's difficulty, but so rarely in times of our own. But it's never, ever the right thing to do. Instead of, I never did like him. I thought you would hate that job. I knew you shouldn't have moved near that landfill. I could see the signs. I'm surprised you didn't do this sooner. You have to pay to play. Try this. Zip it. Firefighters are heroes, not me. Emily says, when I was having chemo, I heard, "Oh, you're so brave," a lot. I appreciated that people were just trying to be complimentary, but it also made me feel like nobody had any idea what having cancer was like. People who choose to run into burning buildings to save strangers are brave. I was just stuck in a shitty situation that I would have given anything to get out of, and the only way to do that was to just keep waking up every day and putting one foot in front of the other. It's not crazy to want to encourage and embolden your friend. We've all had feelings of defeat and insecurity, so we know how important it can be in those times for loved ones to cheer us on with how awesome and special we are. Sometimes, too, our difficult times are a long and exhausting road. Living with a chronic illness is a good example of this. When this is our reality, we need to feel seen for the tenacity it takes just to get up in the morning, instead of judged for any complaints we might have. And hard times can make all of us complain. A lot. However, unless you know a lot about someone's particular situation, it's best to skip making observations and affirmations about how they're handling it. When these comments come from people who don't know all the ins and outs of a situation, a well-intentioned phrase like, "You are so brave," can sometimes sound like, "Your life is so awful, I can't imagine living it." And that kind of admiration for the act of waking up and doing what you need to do to get through the day can feel less like genuine awe and more like the pity we discussed in a previous chapter. Another possible undesirable side effect of a comment like, "You are so strong," is that it puts the suffering person on a pedestal and can make them feel reluctant to be real with their emotions for fear of letting others down or burdening them by sharing the real pain they may be going through. As Kelsey was told by a woman after she lost her spouse, I cringed when people said, "You are so strong." I may have appeared strong, but I was falling apart inside. I was surviving only because of Paxil. Seeing it in action. Scenario 1. Mindy has a 6-year-old daughter who has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair. She is helping her daughter navigate the chair through a tight bathroom doorway at the movie theater. She runs into Priya, the mother of her daughter's classmate, who is standing in line. They chit-chat idly for about 10 seconds about the movie, and then, after a pause, Priya, "You know, Mindy, I simply just don't know how you do it." Mindy, "Do what?" she asks with dread. Priya, "Oh, raise Samantha like that. Managing all the challenges? I just could never do it. You're amazing." Given what you have heard so far, you can take a guess at which of the following likely unspoken reactions Mindy has to Priya's comment. 1. Appreciation for Priya's support. 2. Annoyance at Priya's condescending pity. You get a gold star if you pick number 2. Whether you got this answer right or wrong, consider why Mindy would feel annoyed rather than supported by this comment. Then imagine why, in the situation, the most compassionate way for Priya to be with Mindy would probably be to say nothing about her daughter's condition. To help, think about these questions. 1. What message is Mindy hearing from Priya's comment? 2. Why does Priya feel the need to make this comment? The reasons could be both benevolent and condescending. 3. What benefit would Mindy feel from not hearing a comment about her daughter's condition? 4. If Priya wants to connect with Mindy, what kind of observation, comment, or question about Mindy's daughter could Priya make that would help normalize her role as a mother, in the same way that Priya is also a mother? Scenario 2. Joe has lived with multiple sclerosis for over 15 years. His condition flares every now and then, and lately his neuropathic pain has gotten worse. His fatigue is getting really bad, and he hasn't been able to go to work for the last 5 days. It causes him pain to do it, but he still walks his dog every day and is reading to his children before they go to bed. His younger brother John has been staying with the family for a few months as Joe tries to get his life together. John: Joe, seeing you do what you do with the pain and fatigue you have, it has been making me think. My anger issues and hot-headedness cause me a lot of problems at work and with my marriage. Seeing you handle this, just doing what you have to do, I am learning so much by your example. I know you never signed up for this disease or for being my hero, but right now, seeing you with your kids and that goofball of a poodle, I give you major respect. Joe: You sound like a goofball yourself, man, but seriously, thanks. I needed that, especially now. I feel so lame that I haven't been able to get to the office this week. John: That's a bummer. From where I sit, though, you are doing an incredible job. What's going on? We all need to be picked up when we are feeling down, and hearing that we are doing a really great job or that we're amazing, because we really are, when we are feeling quite the opposite is a godsend. If you don't know the nature of someone's particular struggle, however, it's ultimately best to avoid specific statements about how that person is managing it. If they didn't ask you, they probably don't want to know. We all know unsolicited advice can be annoying, even if it's useful. Yet when something is wrong, many of us instinctively move toward trying to solve the problem. That's when we I-want-to-be-helpful types start rattling off the benefits of headstands for fertility. As tempting as it can be to offer up your gem of knowledge that will fix someone else's problem, 99% of the time, your friend doesn't want to hear your advice. But don't take it personally. You can rest assured that you are not the only one with really good advice to give. People in their darkest hour hear enough advice to make a person crazy. And as the advice starts piling up, it gets even crazier to manage because it inevitably gets contradictory. Macrobiotic diet versus raw, plant-based versus paleo, Native American versus Chinese herbal extracts, mediators versus attorneys, IVF versus adoption, and on it goes. Meanwhile, one can rest assured that the person who is living with the difficulty is thinking about how to approach their situation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they've probably put way more time than you have into figuring out what to do. As a mother described about her daughter's unusual health condition, one that took years to diagnose, "For years, people told me what to feed her and what doctors I should visit, when I had already explored those options. What did they think, that I hadn't looked into it? It is my child that is sick." Advice is maddening, but its most significant flaw is how judgmental it can feel to hear it. As one woman struggling with fertility told Kelsey, advice about her infertility made her problem feel merit-based, as if only women doing daily yoga while drinking kombucha deserve to get pregnant. By the same logic, those that don't take the helper's advice deserve to struggle. Fearing this kind of judgment is highly rational because research shows what we instinctively know. that we feel less compassion toward people when we believe they're the cause of their own problems. To learn more about our tendencies to give advice, refer back to our discussion on foisters in Chapter 3. So, what to do when faced with the lure of advice giving? 1. Avoid suggesting cures. Though the instinct may come from the right place, remember, force-feeding your sick friend wheatgrass or some other thing you read about online is not helpful. 2. Avoid the word should. If you have entered a house of sorrow and you feel the word should crossing your lips, stop talking. There's probably food around. Eat something instead. 3. Avoid all of these. Why not adopt instead of doing IVF? Have you tried yoga? What about couples counseling? I read that meat causes cancer. Have you looked for a job on Craigslist? I've heard that eating raw foods will cure you. What to say instead? Going back to our recommendations on what to say in Chapter 4, try, I trust that you know what to do. If you must, because you have some kind of deep, specialized knowledge and experience regarding the person's situation, and you'd feel like a terrible person if you didn't offer advice, you can add to that statement something like, if you want any extra info on XYZ, I can give that to you. If you do offer information, however, you are strongly advised to end that overture with, but I imagine you've got it covered. You get it, right? It's not your job to make suggestions right now. Remember, suffering people are in charge of their own experiences. Unless they ask for your suggestion or feedback, assume they know everything there is to know, and that they've chosen to handle things their way for a very good reason. A great rule of thumb when supporting someone in a hard time echoes the Hippocratic Oath in medicine. Do no harm. Resist the problem-solving urge. Resist the urge to be smart and fix it. Take comfort in the fact that life gives us plenty of other opportunities to prove how smart we are. What to do instead? Embrace the awkward silence. You'll live through it just fine. My friend is driving me insane, and I can't deal, but I feel so guilty even thinking that because her life is so hard right now. Help! Sometimes, hard times can leave a suffering person so stuck in their sadness or anger or fear that they keep repeating the same harmful behaviors over and over. This type of pattern may make it very hard for the person's friends and family to stay quiet and listen without trying to fix it. Sometimes our complaints or frustration with the person are momentary, and it's okay to share those feelings with others, but not with the person at the center of the problem. Other times, however, they are causing a real rift in the relationship. When a loved one's personal trial is so consuming that there's no room for you in the relationship anymore, it's easy to get frustrated, and it's natural to get to a point where you just want to set them straight and get back to normal. The best way to approach this challenge is to focus on where your heart is. Leave aside the advice you'd love to give and simply talk to the person about how you're feeling about the relationship the two of you now have. Saying how you are feeling is a lot harder than telling somebody what to do, but it's a far more vulnerable and trustworthy place to begin. Here are common impulses and our recommended actions. Instead of this, giving advice. Try this. Don't advise. Exercise restraint. Instead of this, being tired of listening to it. Try this. Don't advise. Be patient. Instead of this, ending the relationship over it. Try this. Talk about what's hardest to say, how you are feeling about your relationship in light of this hard time. This is all so much tougher than giving advice, but when you really listen to your friend, you'll hear something far more rewarding than the empty echo of your own brilliance. We know this is going to feel super hard. It will get easier over time. If you take nothing else away from this section, remember this. Almost never, ever dole out advice at all. Try not to be that annoying person. Instead of this, you must feel blank. Try this. I'm sorry. Instead of this, I know how you feel. Try this. Wow, that can be hard. Instead of this, I felt blank when I blank. Try this. What's that like for you? Instead of this, what happened to me was blank. Try this. That happened to me, but I want to know, how are you? Instead of this, you should try blank. Try this. Advise nothing, or only offer a resource if it's requested. Instead of this, did this happen because you blank? Try this. What is known about why this happened? Ask why questions cautiously. Instead of this, oh no, but what about blank? Try this. Be concerned, but stay calm and proffer no examples of worst-case scenarios. Instead of this, I wouldn't worry. Try this. Listen to the source of worry. Instead of this, you're a saint, I could never do it. Try this. You're doing a great job under the circumstances. The bottom line. Empathy is not telling someone how to feel. Squelch the following impulses. Suggesting that you know how someone feels, identifying the cause of the problem, telling someone what they should do about their hard time, reacting with pessimism, minimizing people's concerns, bringing perspective to a situation with forced positivity or platitudes, telling someone how strong or saintly they are. Too often, efforts at comforting a suffering person are made before that person is asked how they're feeling. We want to help by fixing, but that often implies the fixer is right and the person being fixed is defective for not having solved the problem on their own. When such attempts to comfort don't work, it's not a problem of the sufferer being unappreciative. It's simply that the consoler failed to connect. Instead, ask, listen, learn. For a griever, there is rarely any more comfort than companionship on the awful path of sorrow. Hopefully, that path will also include joy and time, but there is no guarantee that it will, and there is no timeline for when it does. There is no human gain in shying away from that reality, as difficult as it may feel. That is the plight of the griever. That is the plight of the witness. Chapter 7. Empathy Directory. Do's and Don'ts Cheat Sheets. If you're looking for some quick information to help someone in an immediate crisis, you're in the right place. Even if you've memorized every exercise and topic covered in this book, this directory is a handy reference of do's and don'ts for hard times such as loss, illness, divorce, and other situations that inevitably come our way. We all know you can't cheat sheet your way into meaningful connections. Why can't life be organized into bullet points? But the tips in the coming sections can definitely help you feel more confident in offering support and help those in crisis feel more supported. At a glance, illness and/or chronic health problem. Intent, empathy. Instead of, I can't believe this is happening to you, but isn't this fatal? But your house isn't handicap accessible. Oh, how awful. But you don't look sick, but you're so young. Try this. I am sorry you are going through this. This sucks. You may be corrected that it doesn't, or it may be just the right thing to hear. When in doubt, ask. I want you to know I am here for you if there's anything I can do. I can help you with fill in the blank, and I am free most Tuesdays if that works. You don't look sick. How are you actually doing? I understand you had to break plans. No worries. Let's try again. Before I finalize the reservation, I'll just confirm that they are wheelchair accessible, or not mention you are checking and just check. Intent, relate. Instead of this, my brother had, blank, and I know how it feels. You know, we all feel blank from time to time, don't worry. That happened to my sister, and it wasn't that big of a deal. We all feel a little tired at the end of the day. Try this. I can't imagine what you were going through. What's that like for you? How are you feeling today? I am sorry. Intent, perspective. Instead of this, any of us could get hit by a bus. At least it's not fill in the blank kind of illness. At least it's treatable. It's only 30% odds. They call that the good cancer, though, right? You are so lucky to not have to work. Think about it like a permanent vacation. Try this. I know someone with this diagnosis, and she is doing totally great now. I don't know if this will be the case for you, but I hope so. What's it like for you today? How do you feel about not being able to work in a paid job? Intent, interest. Instead of this, do they know why you got this? Did you ever smoke? Try this. Is there anything the doctors can say about it now? How are you feeling about what happened? What's it like to fill in the blank? Intent, hope, and/or resolve. Instead of this, you can get through this. My cousin did. You are so strong. You are a fighter. You are so brave. You just have to get out of the house, or whatever change in lifestyle you think a sick person has to make. Try this. I have seen you manage really tough things in the past, and I know you can get through this. You don't have to be strong for me. Tell me how I can support you the most. How about we try fill in the blank? Basically anything that nudges someone out of their malaise-filled comfort zone. And if it's uncomfortable, we'll stop immediately. A few thoughtful gestures. Got me a pair of socks that said, "I'm so high, I don't care." Bought me a stuffed animal, which even a sarcastic adult like myself appreciated. Gave us a jar of quarters to pay for parking or bought us parking passes. Our son was in a coma, and friends shared the load and visited him in the hospital. Made me several playlists with different themes for different moods. Friends of a friend whom I barely knew came by the rehabilitation center with their guitars and sang me songs. Sent me a deep dish pizza from a restaurant in my hometown of Chicago. Made me a book of redeemable friend coupons. Paid for someone to come over and clean my house while I was in the hospital. Hung inexpensive prints from my favorite artists all over my hospital room. Took my daughter to school 3 days a week so I could get to outpatient treatment. At a glance, divorce. Intent, empathy. Instead of, "Have you thought about counseling?" Try, "How are you doing?" Instead of, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Try, "How do you feel about your process in getting to this point?" Instead of, "She was a jerk anyway." Try, "Wow, that can be hard." Intent, relate. Instead of, "Didn't so-and-so down the street get divorced?" Try, "I went through that kind of experience and I had those same feelings." Instead of, "We've all been there." Try, "My brother, who I greatly admire, went through a similar experience." Intent, perspective. Instead of, "You will find someone else. I saw this coming. You two weren't meant for each other. I had a feeling this relationship was unstable for a while." Try this. The best time to try offering perspective is a few months or more after the separation. Once this is all over, I truly believe you will be happier for this. Intent, interest. Instead of this, "How are the kids holding up? Have you started dating yet? What happened? Do you think he or she was cheating?" Try this. "How did the court case, moving talk with the ex, etc. go?" Only if there is time for a real answer, then, "How are you feeling about finances, moving, kids, etc.? Of course, I am curious about what led to this, but I just hope that you are doing okay and we can talk about what happened whenever, if ever, you want to. Intent, hope, and/or resolve. Instead of, "You shouldn't let her push you around anymore." Try, "I trust you are doing the right thing and will know how to handle yourself. You are attractive and charming and a great catch." A few thoughtful gestures. A girlfriend who lives across the country sent me a really funny gag gift about what to do when you break up. It was a wheel of retribution, and it made me laugh. Always a good thing. A friend had had balloons brought into my apartment to welcome me to my new place. My good friend got me a book of essays about going through divorce. My best friend had flowers waiting on my desk when I got back from divorce court, which, by the way, is the worst part. Coming over with a ton of ice cream as the typical breakup food was really sweet, and added a sense of humor to it, too. At a glance, fertility struggles and miscarriage. Intent, empathy. Instead of this, have you thought about adoption, diet change, acupuncture, yoga? Try to relax, go on vacation, limit your work schedule. Just do anything. There are so many foster kids that need homes, though. Try this. How are you doing? If there is anything I can do, let me know. How do you feel about your process in getting to this point? I have some thoughts or treatment experiences if you ever want to hear them, though I understand if you don't. Intent, relate. Instead of this, I tried for 6 months before anything happened. Sometimes it just takes time. Try this. I've never been through infertility, but if you ever want to talk about it, I am here. My brother went through a similar experience. If you have any questions, I can put you in touch. Intent, perspective. Instead of this, don't worry, it eventually happened for me. Parenthood is not all that it's cracked up to be. You should come to the holiday event this year. It will make you feel better. This was nature's way of ending a bad pregnancy. It'll happen when you're truly ready. Try this. Wow, that can be hard. How are you doing? If it's too hard to come to my baby shower, I completely understand. I am sorry about your loss. Intent, interest. Instead of this, are you pregnant yet? How much does it cost? Whose problem is it? If person miscarried, how did it happen? What did you do? Try this. How did the medical appointment go, if you are in the know about appointments? How are you feeling about finances, upcoming holiday events, or baby shower, etc.? Any difficult side effects of the medication? Ask several weeks after a miscarriage or failed fertility treatment. How are you feeling about blank? Intent, hope, and/or resolve. Instead of this, I just know you will get pregnant. It just wasn't meant to be. It wasn't God's plan. At least you know you can get pregnant if the person miscarried. Try this. No matter how you do it, I know you will make a great parent. I am glad you're still trying. My brother and his wife did this for 3 years, and on the 3rd try, it finally worked. That's my hope for you. How are you feeling about it? A few thoughtful gestures. A dear friend wanted me to attend her child's birthday party, but being around kids was too hard. She then asked if I could help out with just hanging up the party decorations, also offering that I could leave before others arrived. I was single, trying to get pregnant. My friend who took me to my insemination appointment also treated me to lunch afterward to mark this momentous occasion. Friends wanted to plan a summer vacation with us, and with the nature of infertility appointments, we couldn't firm anything up until the last minute. Even though it meant having fewer vacation options, they were very understanding. When saying I didn't want to be asked about being pregnant, anxious and excited friends who really wanted to know respected my wishes. After my miscarriage, a neighbor left me a plant at my door. At a glance, loss. Intent, empathy. Instead of this, I can't believe this happened, but how will you continue to support the family? Who is going to pay for all of the expenses? You really should move on. Try this. I am so sorry you are going through this. I'd like to help with the kids if I can. I am free to babysit. People grieve in their own time, in their own way. Intent, relate. Instead of this, I lost my mother and I was devastated. Try this. I can't imagine what you're going through. This is really hard. How are you feeling now? Intent, perspective. Instead of this, loss is a part of life. At least he lived a full life. At least you could see her in the end. Try this. Let the grieving person come up with their own perspective, except that they may not. Intent, interest. Instead of this, what kind of inheritance might you get? Did he smoke, drink? Try this. What are your next steps, and is there anything I can do to help? What was she like? What was your child's name? Intent, hope, and/or resolve. Instead of this, it's been 6 months, you should be over this by now. You will find somebody else? Try this. Grief happens in its own time. You will feel better one day, but I am here for you now. A few thoughtful gestures. We were so grief-stricken at the loss of our daughter that some people from our church made all the arrangements at our house for our son's birthday party. We didn't have to lift a finger. My friend created a beautiful announcement about my mother's passing that we posted outside our house. When my son killed himself, a colleague from work gave me a poem about loss. Friends helped me organize and clean up my mother's things. She was a hoarder, and this was a really big job. When my good friend died in a car accident, work colleagues took me out to lunch. I never asked for it, but after my wife died, my neighbor swept up the leaves that accumulated every few days for about a month without ever mentioning it. At a glance, unemployment. Intent, empathy. Instead of this, I hope that your finances can manage this. Wow, I can't imagine what that feels like. Is your spouse handling the news okay? Try this. This happened to me. It sucks. Because this kind of incident brings a lot of shame. Shoot them a LinkedIn request or write a recommendation on their online profile. I really like the work you were able to do here. I will miss you. I'm here to talk if you need to. Intent, perspective. Instead of this, I wish I could have some time off. At least you're on unemployment. When one door closes, another one opens. Try this. I know now this feels horrible, but you are so talented. Something will come up. Let's get your mind off things. Let me take you out to dinner, or just treat without mentioning it. Intent, interest. Instead of asking, how's the job search every single day, have you sent out more resumes? Why did they fire you? Sending random job leads and asking if the person followed up. Try this. Send me your resume. I'll see if anyone I know would be interested. Pass on relevant job leads with, maybe you know someone who'd be interested? A few thoughtful gestures. A friend made me cupcakes that said, I love you. A colleague called after she heard the news and said how saddened she was to hear it. A colleague continued to send me relevant job leads and made introductions when it seemed worthwhile. A good friend gave me consulting work to get me over a financial hump. I couldn't afford to keep my hairstyle. My neighbor is a hairdresser and would style my hair for free before I had an interview. Some colleagues from my old work sent me LinkedIn requests. Friends networked in their neighborhood and found me a retail job. A colleague offered to be my reference when I was afraid I wouldn't have a good one. Conclusion. You got this. The fear that we'll mess it up, the fear of saying something wrong, and the fear that we don't have the bandwidth to really help, these are the three things that most often get in the way of our reaching out to others. What these concerns essentially boil down to, though, is a simple lack of trust in ourselves, in what we already know how to do, and that who we are is enough. If we want to be someone people trust and reach out to, we need to trust ourselves. That doesn't mean being perfect, it simply means being who we are. 1. Trust your concern. Your kindness is your credential. If you care, your care belongs. 2. Trust your values. Put your own oxygen mask on first. Don't judge or assume. 3. Trust your behavior. Listening speaks volumes about care. Small moves make a big difference. We can all have an important place in the lives of those around us, and we can take up as little or as much room in those lives as we can handle, or as the situation calls for. Once we trust our capacities to give and to accept the limits of our giving, we can give more freely and with more joy. To do that, we need to move beyond our usual stories about others failing us and about us failing others. We need to move toward being kinder and more accepting of our and others' shortcomings and differences, and ultimately, toward richer, broader expressions of being human. Showing up for one another with authenticity and vulnerability and sticking together through life's hard times is what bonds us the deepest to each other. When we learn to connect with people in this way, we foster intimate and lasting ride-or-die relationships. Ultimately, the moments of sorrow and fear we sit through together will also give us our moments of greatest nourishment, as both givers and receivers. So yeah, learning to show up can be scary. But is the temporary fear and discomfort worth it? More than anything. About the research. This book is based on an exploration with many people about what works and doesn't when giving support in difficult times. Some hard times weren't addressed because there wasn't enough data to do so. Other issues require a thorny mix of professional and community support and could not be responsibly addressed without more nuance. Some life situations, like parenting or coming out, have a wide range of experiences from good to hard that didn't fit well in the set of issues elaborated on. All that being said, using your powers of empathy, it is reasonable to argue that concepts described here can guide you through any number of life's rough neighborhoods. Responses came from over 900 participants to an online survey of open-ended questions and from 50 interviews. People were asked about the kinds of words and gestures they found helpful in difficult situations and what was hard to hear from people ranging from strangers and colleagues to friends and family. In addition, over 450 participants across several empathy workshops, talks, and events completed gesture cards with similar information about how people stepped up and what efforts fell flat. The survey and interview data was read and reread, then coded, categorized, and organized into themes that were distilled into the essential ideas presented in the book. In some cases, there were other also intriguing hints of themes regarding religion, humor, and touch, but ultimately there was not enough data to substantiate any claims, and we did not present them in the book. Themes that are presented in the book were cross-checked and developed with 6 readers, while several of the book's recommendations were verified with participants in several empathy bootcamp workshops. Leaving no stone unturned, concepts and themes that came up in the questionnaire and interview data were supported with a thorough review of peer-reviewed studies found in journals addressing topics like divorce, infertility, illness, and loss, while concepts on matters like advice-giving and listening were supported by articles in communication studies, with liberties taken to adapt and greatly distill these ideas to make our recommendations actionable. The final form of verification around themes from the data came from Kelsey's and Emily's own personal experiences. We are humans, after all, and through our collaboration, made sure we could confidently stand behind the concepts, premises, and recommendations presented here. People shared their experiences and wisdom with us to benefit others in their similar situations. We hope their hard-earned wisdom can achieve that, while circling back to the person whose benefit matters most. You. Caveat about the data. The nature of our exploration of these topics did not allow us to thoroughly examine how issues of race, ethnicity, and culture play out in the kinds of gestures that are offered and how those are experienced. Participants in the survey and interviews and workshops were geographically, religiously, ethnically, sexually, and by gender diverse, and nothing we heard suggested providing comfort differently because of their background. However, some scholarship in communication studies suggests that a different approach with a focus on cultural and gender analysis would be able to find such differences if they are there, and it would be useful if such an exploration were done. This is Exie Sands. We hope you have enjoyed this unabridged production of There Is No Good Card for This, What to Say and Do When Life is Scary, Awful, and Unfair to People You Love, by Kelsey Crowe, Ph.D., and Emily McDowell. This program was produced by Common Mode, Paul Fowley, Technical Director. Executive Producer, Katie Ostroka. Copyright 2017 by Kelsey Crowe and Emily McDowell. Production copyright 2017 by HarperCollins Publishers. All rights reserved. Thank you for listening.